Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I am super excited to present to you my NestJS course. I've been working at this for quite a while now. NestJS is a terrific Node.js framework that I am utilizing at work and I've learned so much about, and I want to share that knowledge with you. So I actually went ahead and I created a 10-hour Udemy course with two projects. The first project I'm going to present here on YouTube for you guys, but the second project is going to be exclusively on Udemy. I'm going to introduce both projects. The first project is going to be for understanding the fundamentals of Nest. We're still going to learn quite a bit, but then the other project is going to be for more advanced learning and really you want to develop your Nest skills to become an expert. I'll have a link in the description below with a discount if you are interested. I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome to my NestJS course. I am super excited to have you here, and I'm sure you are going to be learning quite a lot. NestJS is something that I have extensive experience with. I actually use it all the time at my current job, and I have grown and learned so much about it, and I'm excited to share that with you. So the first thing that I want to do is quickly introduce exactly what NestJS is, and then I'm going to introduce the projects that we are going to be building. So the best thing to utilize in order to understand what a framework is to go to the website. So over here, I am inside of the nestjs.com website, and the snippet that we have here pretty much describes exactly what NestJS is. A progressive Node.js framework for building efficient, reliable, and scalable server-side applications. So let's actually begin with this part right over here. So the first part is it's a Node framework. So it's a framework that is built on top of Node. Over here, it says it's progressive. So a lot of Node frameworks don't come with some of the things that we actually need to build an application with. However, NestJS comes with a lot of different things right off the bat. And we actually don't even have to introduce third-party libraries in order to do it. Also, it has a great file and folder structure that we can utilize. And so that's why it is progressive. Now, this application or this framework, what it allows us to do is build scalable server-side applications. So what is a server-side application? Well, it is an application that is going to serve us information, serve us data, serve us a web page, etc. So we have to hit a specific endpoint and it is going to return data to us. That is exactly what a server-side application is. Now, an API is a server-side application, and that is the most common use case with Nest.js, an API. So that's exactly what we are going to be building in this course. We're going to be utilizing NestJS to build a REST API. And if you're unfamiliar with a REST API, do not worry, I'll have an explanatory video about that. So let's quickly go ahead and actually introduce exactly what we are going to be building. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to go to present mode. And the first thing that we're going to be building is an expense application. Now this is going to be an API. And this is going to allow us to learn the basics of NestJS. We're going to learn things about controllers, about services, about DTOs, interceptors, modules, as well as pipes. So these are different entities inside of NestJS, and if this doesn't make any sense to you, that's okay. But these are the fundamental blocks of NestJS, and we're going to learn all about them inside of this expense app. Now, once we complete this expense app, we are going to move on to a realtor app. This is going to mock one of the typical realtor websites like Zillow.com or Realtor.com. Of course, it's going to only mock the API side of it, not the web side of it. And over here, we're going to be building a more production-ready application. So we're going to have ORM integration. If you're unfamiliar with what that is, well, it's just a way that we can connect to a database. And we will be connecting to a real Postgres database that is going to be hosted in the cloud. We're also going to talk about authentication as well as authorization. We're also going to be talking about interceptors as well in more detail. We're going to be talking about another entity called guards. And another thing that is extremely important and is not taught is testing. We're going to learn exactly how we can test our Nest API. So I'm super excited to have you here. This is what we're going to be building, and I hope you guys enjoy. In this video, what we're going to do is quickly explain exactly what a REST API is. Now, in order to understand what a REST API is, we first need to understand the server-client model. In this video, what we're going to do is quickly explain exactly what a REST API is. Now, in order to understand what a REST API is, you need to understand the web server model. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to this website right over here, realtor.ca, and I'm going to start viewing some homes. Now, right here, you can see I'm getting a bunch of different home listings. Now, let's actually take a look at these cards. What are these cards? Well, if you think about them from a software standpoint, it's data. So these cards are data. So we have data about the home price, we have data about the home address, also the number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, the realtor associated with them, etc. Now, this website, how is it going to get this data? Well, what it needs to do is make a request to a server, and then the server can fetch that data from the database, and then it's going to send that data back. And we can actually look at this inside of this website itself by opening our Google Chrome inspection tools and going to the network tab. I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick refresh. And you can see all of the different calls that are being made. And one of these calls is going to be to the API that is responsible for fetching this data. So the fetching process isn't going to be in the website itself. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to have that business logic in the server. So let's actually take a look at a diagram. So over here, we have our client, which is, again, this website right over here, and it needs this house data. So what it's going to do is make a request to the server that is hosted somewhere else and is not accessible by anybody but this client, saying that, hey, I want, well, data about houses. So over here, the server is going to process that request. It's going to do a bunch of business logic. It's going to interact with the database, get those homes, and then it's going to send that data as a response to the client. The client can then go ahead and populate that data, and so it can, be something like this. All right, so that's pretty much all that it is. Now, you might be wondering exactly what is this request? Well, inside of our server, we can have multiple different endpoints, and each endpoint can have a particular verb. So for over here, for example, we can have a slash endpoint, and this is responsible for getting all of our homes. And we're going to assign it with the verb get, like so. And this means we're going to make a get request to slash home, and this endpoint is going to be responsible for, well, getting our homes. And so our client, if it needs to get all the homes, is going to make this request. You can also make another request to another endpoint if you want to get just one specific home. This is going to be slash home slash the ID of the home. If we want to create a home, we could also make a request to slash home, but this time we're going to change the verb to post. So typically, if you want to create something, the verb is post. If you want to get something, the verb is get. We can also do the same thing for updating a home with a put verb, as well as deleting a home with a delete verb. So what we can do is the client can access any particular endpoint and make that request in order to perform a certain action. And so that is what we're going to be building inside of our Nest application. We are going to be building the server side, and then the client can go ahead and just make requests and get responses. In this video, we're going to quickly discuss all of the different things that we need inside of our local machine to get started with NestJS. And thankfully, there's actually not a lot that we need. The first thing that we need is a code editor. I highly suggest Visual Studio Code, so if you need a code editor, go ahead and download it. Now feel free to use whatever code editor you want. I will, however, be using Visual Studio Code. Now, because NestJS is a Node.js framework, we need to have Node.js on our local machine. So go ahead and install it. If you don't, it's just on nodejs.org.download and download it for whatever operating system that you are utilizing. I am utilizing Mac, so I would click on Mac. Now, I already installed this, so I'm not going to install it again, and the installation process is actually really easy, so there's really no need to demo it. Now, once everything is installed, what you can actually do is open up your terminal. Let's go ahead and clean that. So you can open up a terminal and you can very simply execute node-v, and if you get a version, that means you have successfully installed Node on your local machine. However, if you're getting an error such as node command unknown, that means you have to do some sort of troubleshooting because you didn't install it correctly. And that is honestly all it is that you need to get started with this course. One last thing that I want to discuss is that all of my code is going to be located inside of my GitHub repo. So if you ever need to refer to it, go ahead, go to the GitHub repo. You can either download it or clone it if you know Git, and you can just go ahead and utilize that if you are ever stuck. So that's pretty much all that it is that you need, and let's actually get started with the first project. Alright, my good friends, I think now is a very good time to introduce our very first project. Now this is going to be an expense application, and we're going to be building the API side of this expense app. Now, what is this expense app going to do? Well, we can utilize this application to add any source of income as well as any source of expenses. And what it will do is going to save those income reports as well as those expense reports in the database so we can later take a look at them. So again, for example, let's say I have a salary and my salary pays me $1,000. I can add that as a report inside of this application saying that this is an income report. Maybe I spent $200 on food. I can add that as a report, and then that will be an expense report. And later on, of course, what I can do is I can compare and contrast my income versus my expenses using this application. So let's just take a quick look at exactly what are the endpoints that we are going to be implementing in this app. So the first 5 endpoints are going to be relating to incomes. So over here we have /report/income, and this is going to be a GET request. And then essentially what this endpoint is going to do is it's going to give us an array of all of our income reports. Over here we have another GET request, but this is going to be /report/income/income ID. So over here, what this is going to do is just get us that one income report. So it's just going to get us that one object rather than that array. And then over here we have a post request to /report/income. This will allow us to create an income report. And then over here a put request to /report/income/ID. And this of course is going to be a dynamic ID, and we'll talk about that later. But this is going to allow us to update an income report. And then over here we have this endpoint for deleting an income report. So I hope this makes sense to you. This is just basic REST principles. Now, also, we're going to have to deal with expenses. So we're going to have endpoints that are very, very identical, like pretty much the same thing, except instead of /income, it's going to be /expense. So this is to get all of our expenses. This is to get to one expense. This over here is to create an expense. This over here is to update an expense. And this one, lastly, is to delete an expense. So I'm super excited to do this, even though it's a very simplistic application and kind of a basic CRUD app. There's a lot of different things that we are going to be learning in this project, and they're really the fundamentals of Nest. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be some things that are relatively complicated to understand, because there's some things that we're going to be doing here that are going to be fundamental to the next project, which has a lot of complexity and a lot of advanced Nest features. So stay tuned, and I guess we'll get started on this one. Now that we talked about exactly what we are going to be building, let's go ahead and create a new Nest application to build that expense API. Now, in order to do this, what we first need to do is install the Nest CLI on our local machine. And what the CLI is a command line interface that is going to give us a bunch of different commands that we can execute that are going to help us build our Nest application. So for example, once we install the CLI, what we can do is we can build a boilerplate Nest app with all of the dependencies that are needed already installed. And Nest is built with multiple entities like modules, controllers, services, etc. Now we'll talk about that in great detail, but if we ever want to create any one of these entities, we can use the CLI to create it for us. So it's very recommended and very helpful to have the CLI in utilizing this wonderful tool. So let's go ahead and install the CLI globally on our machine. I'm over here on the NestJS documentation, docs.nestjs.com/CLI/overview. And it says here that in order to install the CLI, what we need to do is execute this command in our terminal. So let's go ahead and copy this command. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my terminal. And I'm going to zoom in quite a bit. Let's just zoom in. And I'm going to paste this command. And this command over here is going to be npm install-g, meaning globally, at NestJS CLI. Now, if you execute this and you have some permission errors, what you can do is prepend sudo, enter your computer password, and then you should be able to install it correctly. Now, this is going to take some time to globally install, so I actually already did this, but that is the command that you need to execute in order to install it. Now, in order to check that you installed it correctly, what I recommend doing is closing up the terminal and then opening up a new instance of that terminal. So let's go ahead and open up a very new instance and then execute the command nest-v. And what this is going to do is going to give us the version of Nest that you have installed on your machine. If you get any version, that means you have Nest installed correctly. And as you can see here, I'm getting version 8.1.8. However, if you get an error saying that this nest command is unknown, something like this error right over here, command not found, and then over here it says nest, well, that means you didn't install Nest correctly and you're going to have to do some troubleshooting. However, 99% of the time, I do expect that the npm install-g for global at Nest CLI, that should work. So now that we got that done, what we need to do is we need to create a new Nest project. So in order to create a Nest project, let's go to the documentation. Let's scroll down over here. And to create, build, and run a new Nest project, these are the steps that you have to take. So over here, what we're going to need to execute is nest, and this is the CLI, and then new for new project, and then my project name. So over here, what we can do is we can move into whatever directory you want this project to be created at. Let's say the desktop for me. And then I'm going to say nest new, and I'm going to give this application a name. Now, I actually already created a brand new Nest application that is called expense app, not express app, expense app. I already created one just because this command does take some time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this to, but I recommend you just calling it expense app. Now, once you execute this command, it's going to ask you a few questions. It's going to ask you which package manager you want to use. You should say npm for this. Now, the installation process is going to take a few minutes, so that's why I'm going to Control-C and click out of it. I already installed this, so I'm just going to delete this additional folder that I got. Now what I can very simply do is go to VS Code and open up my project. So I actually already have it opened up, but what you can do is you can open up VS Code, go to File, Open Folder, and then you can go to your desktop directory or whatever directory you created that Nest application in, click on it, and then open. And there we go. You can see here that I have it open. And this is what you should see. So you should see a bunch of files and folders, but the most important thing is this right over here, the source. This is where we're going to be doing 99% of our work. So you should see an app.controller, you should see an app.module, as well as an app.service. So what I'm going to do is I want to actually start up this server. I want to see if it actually works. So let's go over to our package.json and let's look at this command right over here. So it seems as though this is how we are going to run our Nest application in development. So start:dev, and that's actually the recommended thing to run right over here. So npm run start:dev. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new terminal. And I am going to, run npm run, and then I'm going to do start:dev. So let's go ahead and run that, and you can see now our application is up and running. So now let's actually just test out that this app is running. So you can see here, and you don't have to understand what's going on, but you can see here we have this method, and it's calling this getHello method inside of the service file. And it's returning hello world. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to localhost 3000 because this is where this application is running on localhost 3000. And we're going to see if, it's working and we get that hello world message. And as you can see, it is working. So our API is up and running and it's working the way that we expect it to. That's awesome. Now let's go ahead and start creating our app and creating those different endpoints. In the last video, what we did was we created our very first Nest project and we got it running on localhost 3000. However, what we want to do is implement these endpoints. So in this video, what we're going to do is learn exactly how we can implement different endpoints inside of Nest. Now, specifically for this very first lecture, we're going to learn how we can implement this first endpoint. Now, once we learn exactly how we can implement this one, the other ones are going to be pretty much the same and a breeze. Now, another thing I want to note is that this is supposed to return an array of objects. Each object is going to be an income report, so whether it's salary, YouTube, Udemy, etc. Now, for this very first implementation, because we're not storing any income reports, we're just going to return a hard-coded empty array. But remember, this is the first version of the implementation. Afterwards, we're going to have a little bit of a database to interact with to actually get the real income reports that we want to store. So again, this is the very first implementation. Now, how in the world are we going to create endpoints inside of Nest? Well, in NestJS, there's a bunch of different entities that we can utilize to do different things. Here is an example of 5 of the most common entities that we're going to be utilizing: controllers, modules, services, guards, and data transfer objects. Now, there are more entities inside of Nest, but these are the 5 most common. Now, each one of these entities is going to do a different thing inside of our Nest application. And actually, one of them is going to be responsible for creating, endpoints. Now, which one is that? Well, it is going to be the controller. So the controller entity is responsible for creating endpoints inside of our Nest application. So let's actually go ahead and, create this very first endpoint right over here inside of a controller. All right. So let's go into our source directory. And you can see in our source directory, we have, a lot of these entities that I talked about. We have the app.controller.ts, we have the app.module.ts, we have the app.service.ts. We know what we want to do is we want to create a, new endpoint. So what we're going to do to create this endpoint is move into the app.controller.ts. And for this very first implementation, what I am going to do is delete everything, and we're going to work from scratch just so we can really learn what's going on with controllers. Later on, we're going to utilize whatever the Nest CLI defaults for us. But again, for this very first implementation, let's go ahead and delete everything inside of the app.controller.ts file. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now, what we're going to do here is we want to create a new controller entity. Now, every single entity inside of NestJS is a class. So everything is going to be a class, a service, a module, a guard, everything is a class. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say class, and then we're going to say app controller. We're going to give this class a name, and we're going to have our curly braces. So this right here is our class. Now, right now, Nest has no idea what entity this is. Is it a module? Is it a controller? Is it a service? All these different entities have different features and different abilities. So what we need to do is we need to tell NestJS that this is going to be a controller and should have the ability to create endpoints. In order to do this, we are going to utilize what is known as a decorator. So over here, we're going to import a decorator. And if you don't know what that is, do not worry. So we're going to import some decorator that I'll talk about a little bit later. We're going to import that from @nestjs and then /common. So /common. And we are going to import something called controller. And you can see here that this is a class decorator. So what we can do is we can grab this decorator and right above the class that we want it to be a controller, we can say @ and then controller and then invoke it like a function. And so what this is going to do is give this class the ability to be a controller. And that's really all it is that we have to do. Now inside of here, what we can do is we can create different methods. And these different methods are going to return whatever that endpoint is supposed to return. Now, for example, over here, what we want to do is we want to return all of the income reports. So I'm going to say here, get all income reports. So get all income reports. And again, what this method is going to do is return whatever this endpoint is supposed to return. Now, for our very first implementation, what we wanted to do is return an empty array. So this method is going to return an empty array. And this is actually going to be the HTTP response that we get back. So this return right here. Now, so this is all fine and dandy. However, what we need to do is we need to tell NestJS that this is going to be a GET request. Because again, it could be a GET, it could be a POST, it could be a delete, it could be whatever. So we need to tell it specifically that this is going to be a GET request. So what we can do here is inside of Nest Common, we can import another decorator known as this GET decorator. And we don't put this GET decorator on top of the class. Instead, we put it on top of the method. So over here, what we can do is we can grab this decorator, and right on top of the method, we can say that this method is going to be responsible for a GET request. So once we make a GET request at a specific path, it should call this method and return whatever this method is returning. So an empty array. And this is all it is that we have to do. Really, that's pretty much it. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and save this. And the very last thing that we need to do is we need to export this class. The reason why we need to export this class is because it's being used here in the app.module.ts. This is another entity that we'll talk about a little bit later. But you can see here that it's being used and it's put inside of this array where the property is controllers. So we're going to go ahead and save this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to localhost 3000 and we're just going to do a quick refresh. And once we get the refresh, you can see that we get an empty array. So inside of our browser, we're always making GET requests. And so we're making this GET request right over here. So this is the GET request that we're making to localhost 3000 and then slash. We have really no path. And so what's happening here is, okay, because this is a GET request, it sees, okay, well, this is the GET decorator. We need to call this method, and this method over here is returning an empty array. Now, if we were to return an object, for instance, let's comment that out, and let's do a refresh, you can see that we get an object. So congrats, we actually implemented our very first endpoint. At this point, we are getting really close. However, we're not quite there yet. In order to return this array and call this method, what we have to do is call this endpoint. So http:/localhost:3000. However, this isn't what we wanted. Instead, what we wanted to do is hit the endpoint /report/income. So we should have something like this instead. And calling this endpoint should call this method and return an array. However, let's go ahead and give this a call and let's put it in our browser and let's see what happens. So once we actually call it, we get a object, and this actually is a error object. So you can see here we have a status code of 404, and if you know your HTTP codes, this is a not found code. And very simply, what it's stating here is this endpoint right here is not found inside of our Nest application. We did not define it anywhere. And that makes sense because, well, we didn't define it anywhere. Right now, we are in the app.controller.ts, and this is actually the root file. So it's gonna have just the bare bones simple slash. So it's just gonna be whatever this API is called, and the path is just gonna be a slash, which basically means it's empty. Again, what we want is /report/income. Now, how can we accomplish this? Well, we can actually accomplish this very easily utilizing either the controller decorator or this get decorator. Very simply, all we have to do, and let me just quickly explain, this is what we have right now. All we have to do is grab what we want to append to this API path. So inside of the controller, I'm going to say I want to append /report/income. And now what's going to happen is it's going to look something like this. So it's going to be our API and then plus this path. And so now if we were to save this and go to refresh this, you can see now we have our empty array. This is really good. Now we can actually do the exact same thing inside of our get. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it inside the get, and this is actually going to result in the exact same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save that and refresh, and you can see that everything is working fine. If I went to localhost 3000 on its own, so I'm just going to copy that and paste that in, you can see now we're getting an error saying that, hey, this path doesn't exist, which makes sense. Okay, so this is all fine and dandy, but when do I put this in the get and when do I put it in the controller? Is there a difference? Well, there actually is quite a big difference. So inside of our controller, we might have multiple methods. We might have multiple route handlers. For example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and I'm going to grab another get request. I'm going to call this get all income reports to, and this is just going to return an object. So this is going to return an empty object. And what I'm going to do is over here, I'm going to make this empty. And I'm going to make this empty as well. And then for this, I'm going to say, let's just add something in here. Let's say report, or you know what, let's add something else. Let's say hello. This is very generic. So what do you think will happen here? Okay, so over here, what's happening is, well, we're appending nothing. So if we hit localhost 3000, we should get this array right over here. So let's go over here. Let's paste that in. And that's exactly what we get. We get this array. Now over here, what we're doing is we're appending hello. So hello. So it should be something like this. So let me go ahead and copy that. So if we hit this endpoint, we should return an object rather than an array. So let's go here, let's return this. And as you can see, we're returning an object. Now, what I want to do is inside of the controller, I am going to add hi. So I hope you have the gist of what's gonna happen here. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this. And I'm gonna try to hit this endpoint. So remember, this endpoint before was localhost 3000 plus nothing. So very simply, just localhost 3000. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go here, paste that in, and now we're getting an error saying that, hey, this route is not found. Let's actually go ahead and try this endpoint now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go localhost 3000/hello. And I'm gonna go ahead and paste that in. And well, I'm also getting an error here. So what's happening here is that whatever is in the controller is going to be appended for every single route inside of the controller class. So what's really is happening here is we have the API over here, and then it's going to be plus whatever is in the controller, and then plus whatever is in the method decorators. And this, I mean the decorators as well. Decorators. So that's getting a little messy, but I hope you know what I mean here. So what's happening right now, if we want to hit this endpoint, it's going to be localhost 3000 plus hi and then plus nothing. So really it's going to be localhost 3000/hi. And this should give us an empty array. Now if we want to hit this endpoint, then it's going to be localhost 3000 plus hi plus hello. So like so. So it's going to be then /hello like that. So now if I were to paste that in, you can see we get our object. So you kind of get the gist at this point. If we have a certain path that we want applied in every single endpoint inside of our controller, we're going to put it inside of, well, the controller decorator. If we have a path that we want specifically to be appended for a certain endpoint and not other endpoints, then we're going to put it inside of these method decorators right over here. I hope that makes sense. So let's actually look at what we have here. So we have /report/income. So this seems, so /report/income is consistent across all of the endpoints. Now there are some other endpoints that have /id, but /report/income is consistent across all of the endpoints. So what if we just put the /report/income inside of the controller and then these /ids inside of the method decorators that actually need them? So it's going to be the get, the put, and the delete. And this is the actual right way to go. So over here, we're going to do /report/income. Now over here, this actually could either be an income or an expense. So we have to somehow make this dynamic, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to completely get rid of this. And let's just save that for now. We're probably going to get rid of this method later, but let's save that for now. And now what we're going to do is we're going to hit /localhost 3000 plus the controller. And remember, there's nothing inside of the get. We can either leave this as an empty string or we can just completely remove the string itself. And so the path is going to look like so. So this is how the path is going to look like. And now if we were to paste it here, you can see we have our empty array. Okay, so I hope that is clear. Now we're going to move on to the next video. In this video, what we're going to do is focus in on this endpoint right over here. So in this endpoint, again, what we're supposed to do is just return a specific income report based on that income's report ID. And that's really all it is that we have to do. So the path should look something like this. So /income or /report/income and then /whatever the ID is. Now the ID that we're going to do is a UUID. So it could look something like this right over here. As you can see, it could be anything. Now what this should do is return an object of that income report. Now this actually gives us a little bit of complication. How in the world are we going to make this part over here dynamic? Right now it is hard coded, so report/income. But over here, we need it to be /report/income, which is handled by the controller, but then a dynamic ID. So how in the world are we going to accomplish this? Well, this is very, very easy. Let's actually go over here and let's rename this method. This is the method that's going to give us the object. And for now, we'll just leave it as an empty object. So over here, we're going to call this get income report by ID. And then this is going to have the path of /report/income, which is handled by the controller, and then /ID. So what I'm going to do just for now is say /ID like so. So let's actually just take this request and paste it in here. So I'm going to paste that in there. And you can see that this is giving us an error. However, if I changed this to /ID, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change it to /ID, copy it, and paste it back in. Well, that works, and you might expect that to work. Now, this is because this ID is hard-coded. Instead, what we want to do is we want to say that this path over here can be dynamic, and whatever that path name is, we want to give it the variable ID. In order to do this, all we have to do is say colon and then ID. Now again, this can be called whatever it is that we want, but whatever this path is going to be, so for example, if this path is like this, then the variable name is going to be this over here. So in order to access this, the variable of this will be equal to the path. So of course we want this to make sense, so we're going to call it ID, and therefore it's going to look something like this instead. ID is equal to this path. So now, if I went ahead and I made this request, so let's go here and made this request, you can see that we're getting an object. And in fact, I can make anything and I still get this object because we're still hitting this endpoint. Now, you might be thinking, well, how in the world am I going to extract the ID? I'm going to need it eventually. Don't worry, we'll talk about that later. Now, there is one thing that I do want to discuss. Now that we've learned this right over here, we have to understand that we actually both want income reports as well as expense reports. So really what we need here is something like /income when we want to hit the income, but whenever we want to do something with an expense, well, we want to, of course, call the expense. We want to call it like this. So we actually don't want to hard code this value right over here. We kind of want to make this dynamic. Well, we can make it dynamic the same way we made this dynamic. So instead of having a hard coded income, what we can do is we can do colon, and we can call this report or report type. Maybe we can just call it type. So /report/type, whether it's income or expense. So now what we can do is either hit the income or the expense. So over here, what we can do is, let's go here. So if we were to do /report/expense, this still should hit this array right over here. So I'm going to go here, copy that, and paste that in. So you can see that this is working a-okay. Now you might be thinking, well, this could result in some major complications. What if somebody instead did something like /report/whatever, like this? And obviously what we want instead is /report/either income or expense. We don't want this gibberish. Well, what we can do very simply is inside of the method itself, we can get this type, we can check this type, and if it's some sort of invalid type, you can throw an error. So we can do this manually ourselves. However, again, at this point, this is going to return an empty array. Later on, we'll fix this. All right, this is terrific. So we're getting really, really close. In the next video, let's actually finish this off and create the post, put, and delete requests. I highly encourage that you guys try to implement these endpoints, these last 3 endpoints, by yourself. Really, there is nothing new here. So we've actually talked about exactly how we would implement all of these. Now, just as a quick hint, over here, instead of the get decorators, we're going to need some other decorators to say that these methods are going to be responsible for either post, put, and delete requests. So I'll give you guys 5 seconds to pause the video and implement it by yourself. All right, I hope you guys gave that a go. Let's begin with the post request. So this is going to be to /report/income. Remember, this is already handled by the controller. So really inside of the post decorator, we are not going to be having anything inside of it. So over here, let's go. Let's grab the post decorator. So we have the post, if I can spell that right here, the post decorator. And I'm going to say at post. And then over here, we're going to say create, and we're going to change the names a little bit. Instead of getting all income reports, what we're going to call it is get all reports, because this can either be an expense report or an income report. So over here, we're going to say get report by ID. And over here, we're going to say create report. So we're going to create this report. And that's really all it is that we have to do. For now, let's just create let's return a string saying created. Something very simple like that. Now over here, let's do the same thing with the put as well as the delete. Over here, let's grab our put verb, our decorator. We're going to say at put. Now over here, you can see /income/ or /report/income. Okay, this is handled by our controller, but we have this dynamic ID. So over here, what we can do is /ID. And then over here, we can say update report. Now the last one, you guys probably get the trick. Over here, let's also return something saying updated. So for the delete, let's grab the delete decorator. We're going to say at delete. And this, we're going to have the :ID because we need to know exactly what report we want to delete. We're going to say delete report. And for now, what we're going to do is we are going to, well, just return the string delete. Now these endpoints, we actually can't hit them inside of our browser. So these right over here, we can hit them because they're get requests. However, these are post, put, and delete requests. Now, in order to actually utilize them, I encourage you guys to utilize Postman. Now, in the introductory videos, I showed you exactly everything that you needed to install. One of them was Postman. So I hope you guys have that installed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Postman. Let's open that up. It's taking its sweet time. I'm just going to get rid of completely everything. And I'm going to go here. And you can see here that I use Postman a lot for all of my different projects. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this expense because that's exactly what I was using before. Let's also delete this to do just to make it less cluttered. Maybe even this sub app. You don't have to do this. It's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this button right here. Let me zoom in. Click on this button. And this is going to create a new collection for us. So I'm going to rename this collection by right clicking. And I'm going to call it expense app. As you can see, I already have an expense app. So what I need to do is, well, delete the other expense app. Let's go ahead and do that. Now, this right here is a folder. And inside of this folder, we can have multiple different requests. So we can add a new request. And let's actually add a get request. So we've been hitting which endpoint? This endpoint thus far. So let's go ahead and paste this request in that we've been hitting inside of the browser. So we're going to say /income like so. So now what we can do is we can actually send this off, and you can see that we get back this empty array. So we can actually give this request a name. So we can say here, get all reports. So get all reports, and we can save that. Now let's actually let's give the post request a try. So we can say here, create a report, and we can say post for this. And now what we can do here is call that exact same endpoint, but this time it's a post request because I changed the verb here. We can send this off, and now you can see we get the string back created. So I hope this makes sense. We can of course do the same for the put as well as the delete. So this should update a report. Let's say put. Let's give that a quick save. Let's grab this endpoint. Now remember, this is going to be slash report slash income slash whatever ID. So let's just say 123 for now. And as you can see here, we get updated. Everything seems fine. Let's do the last one, which is the delete. So I'm going to say here, delete. And let's grab this. And we're going to go ahead and save that. And now you can see delete. Okay, everything seems like it's working just fine. Of course, none of this is really functional. We're just returning empty arrays, empty objects, and random strings. We obviously want to do things, but at this point, we really implemented all of our endpoints. So we've pretty much learned really all it is that we need to know about controllers. Controllers are classes that allow us to create different endpoints. So this actually concludes this section. In the next section, what we're going to do is we're going to start making, well, this functional, of course. Now that we have created all of the endpoints, let's actually make these endpoints functional. Thus, we want to make these endpoints do something rather than return a bunch of gibberish. Now, in order to do this, what we need to do is create a database where we can store all of our reports. Now, for this very first project, what we are going to do is utilize just a very simple local database. We are not going to be utilizing a full-blown database like Postgres or MongoDB. We're actually going to learn how to do that in the next project. But for this project, let's just use a local database so that we don't take the focus away from NestJS. So this is going to be a very easy implementation. Right in the source, let's create a data.ts file. Now notice here that I said TS, and I actually didn't introduce this at the moment, but NestJS is almost 99% of the time written in TypeScript. So what we're going to do here is we're going to be working with TypeScript, and that's why every single extension is .ts. Now, I didn't mention this because I didn't want you guys to worry about TypeScript. You need to know absolutely no TypeScript knowledge to take this course, so that's why I didn't bother mentioning it. But once we go over here and creating our data, we're going to be doing a lot of typing. And typing is going to involve, well, a lot of TypeScript knowledge. So we're going to learn a little bit of TypeScript when we create this database. Now, in case you don't know what TypeScript is, it's basically a way where we can type our variables. So for example, because we're using TypeScript, what we can do is something like let name is equal to, my name, the string my name. And as you can see here, we're getting some sort of error. Let's just say my name. The variable name is always kind of iffy. But now what I can do here, because we assigned it as let, we can do my name is equal to, we can change it to Jess if we wanted to. We can then change my name to, let's change it to Jaw. So we can change it to whatever it is that we want. However, we cannot, and we can do this in JavaScript, but with TypeScript we can't do something like this. Assign my name to 44. The reason for this is if we hover over it, you can see here that because we declared my name and we gave it the value of length, that is a string, what ends up happening is that TypeScript says, hey, this is of type string, and we cannot change it to something that is not a string, which is a number. If we hover over this error, you can see here that it says type number is not assignable to type string. So this is actually really, really cool. It gives us a lot of typecasting, and it allows us to catch a lot of these errors inside of development. So that's really the gist of what you need to know. Everything is very strictly typed in TypeScript. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to create a constant called data. And this constant is going to be an object. And this object is going to contain a property called report. And this is going to be an empty array initially. Now in here, what we are going to do is, pass in the reports. So inside of this object, we're going to have a report, and each report is going to have an ID. It's going to have a source. So the source of that report. So if it's an income report, is it your salary? Is it some other sources? Is it your e-commerce business, etc.? If it's an expense, it might be food, it might be equipment, etc., something like that. We're also going to have an amount, so how much income or how much expense. We're also going to have a created at, so when this was created at, and also we're going to have an updated at, and then we're also going to have a type. So whether this is a income or an expense. Now in TypeScript, what we should do is actually give this array a type. Right now when we hover over it, you can see that this data has a type that is an object, and inside of that object we have a property called report, and this report is the value of it is going to be an array, but you can see here it's going to be an array of anything. So what we can do here is we can do data.report.push, and we can push in a string. We can push in a number if we want to. We can push in a Boolean. So a Boolean, or we should probably actually pass in a real Boolean like true. But what we really want to push in is something like this. Again, we want to push in an ID that is going to be a string. So I don't know, some sort of UUID. We want to pass in a source. So we can say salary. We also want to pass in an amount. So let's say 7,500. And then we also want to pass in a created at, and this is going to be a date. So we can say new date, something like that. And over here, we're going to also pass in an updated at. Let's just also say new date for this. And lastly, we're going to pass in a report or a report type. So we can just say type for this. And this can either be expense or income. So what we want to very simply do is be able to push an object like this. However, if we try to push this gibberish, it should throw an error. So what we need to do is specifically tell TypeScript exactly what is inside of this array. Now, one way we can do this is that we can actually grab this object and we can pass it inside of this array. Now what happens, you can see here we're getting a bunch of errors because TypeScript now is able to infer that the report is going to contain an object, an array of these objects over here: ID string, source string, amount string, etc. However, of course, what we don't want to do is we don't want to pass in something initially. We initially want it to be empty. So how is it that we can type it with leaving this empty? Well, we can actually do this very easily. In order to type objects, what we can do is utilize an interface. So an interface is a way that we can type objects. So we're going to call this interface data, and we're going to do curly brackets, and then in here we're going to supply it with the type. So this is going to be an object that is going to contain a report property, and this report property is also going to be an array of objects. So array of objects. Now this object is going to contain an ID that is a string. It's going to contain a source that is a string, an amount. This is going to be a number, a created at that is going to be a date, also an updated at. That's also going to be a date. So let's do date here. And then we also have a type. So a type that is going to be, for now, let's leave it as a string. So this is really all we have to do. And in order to actually get this type, what we can do here is right after the data variable, we can do :data. And now we assign this to this data type. And now you can see we're getting errors here. However, we're not getting any errors here. And this is terrific. That's exactly what we want. So now we can get rid of that. And really, quite frankly, we can get rid of this. Now, one thing that I do want to note is that this type right over here really can either be an expense or an income. It cannot be any other string. So maybe we can actually type this even better. So, because right now what we can do is we can get rid of this expense and we can say bananas, and this works. Really what we want to do is have this string either be an expense or an income. So right here, instead of saying that this is going to be a generic string, what we can do here is we can say that this is either going to be income, the string income, or the string expense. And so now you can see we're getting an error here saying that, hey, this is going to be of type either income or expense. So banana is not assignable to type income or expense. Now, another way we can actually do this is utilizing an enum. So an enum really is effectively doing the same exact thing, but it's a lot better because we can actually export the enum and start utilizing it elsewhere in our code. So over here, what we can say is we can say enum, and we can say report type. And then in here, we can say income. And then we can say here that this is equal to income. And then over here, we can also say expense. We can say that that is equal to expense. You can have a comma here. Now over here, what we can say is that this is of type enum. Now over here, we can say, we can't say income. What we say instead is report type dot expense or income. So this ensures that it's either going to be an expense or an income. So that's just a little bit of typing. Now the last thing that we absolutely need to do is just export this because we're going to want to use it in different files. But that's pretty much it. And hopefully this little lesson taught you quite a bit of TypeScript, because this is really all you have to know. If you understand this, you pretty much understand all you have to know with TypeScript inside of NestJS. Let us begin by implementing the real logic for this endpoint right over here. As a quick reminder, this is going to get all of our reports. Now, the first thing that we actually need to determine is what type of reports do we want to get back? Do we want to get back, well, income reports or expense reports? How do we determine that? Well, we determine that by the dynamic type we set over here. Remember, this is going to be either report/income or report/expense. So we need to determine exactly, well, do we want an expense or a income? And of course, we're going to do that by getting this type somehow inside of this method. Now, how are we going to get this dynamic type in this method? Well, we do that with param decorators. So param decorators are decorators that are going to allow us to extract certain things from the request. Now in this case, we want to extract this path parameter right over here. So what we're going to do is we are going to get this param decorator. And now in here, we're going to do @param. So this is in the parameter of the method. We're going to do @param, saying that we want to extract the parameter, and we have to specify exactly what parameter we want to extract. In this case, I'm going to say type. So over here, as you can see, we're going to get the type. Now what we want to do is we want to assign this parameter to a specific name. Let's also call it type. And we're also going to say that this is of type string. So really simple stuff. So what we're saying here is we want to extract whatever this is. We're going to assign it to a variable called type. We can call this whatever. It doesn't have to be the exact same name. And we're going to say that this is of type string. Let's actually just console.log the type just to see what's going on here. So I'm going to open up my terminal. Let's close this off. As you can see here, my terminal is up and running. What I'm going to do is I am going to close here, and I'm going to go to Postman. And inside of Postman, I'm going to make a request to get all of the reports. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it /income. So now when I make this request, you can see here that we get income. If I were to change this to expense, you can see that we get expense. Now, if I were to change this to complete gibberish, let's change that to gibberish. You can see we get gibberish. Now, obviously, this is not what we want. We either want to get income or expense. But for now, we're going to trust the user that they provide us with income or expense. Later on, we're going to learn how we can perform this type of validation. Okay, so right now, again, we're going to assume that it's either income or expense. And let's actually change it to income. So what we're going to do is once we determine what the type is, we need to actually filter for that specific type. So what we can very simply do here is import that data. So let's go ahead and import the data. We're going to say we're going to move, or we're going to go to the source directory, then we're going to go to data. And inside of the data, let's actually just put some dummy reports for now. So let's go over here. We're gonna have an object. Let's have a string of UUID1. Let's also have a source of, let's have a source of salary. Let's also have an amount. So we're gonna have an amount of 7,500. We're also gonna have a created at of new date, an updated at of new date, and let's also have a type. Now you can see that it's all red because we still need to pass in some things like the type. And this is gonna be an enum type, so we're gonna say report type dot income. Really simple stuff. Now over here, we're getting an error, so let's actually just go ahead and move this to the very top, just so that we don't get this error anymore. So now what we're gonna do is let's just have some more income types. So let's say YouTube pays me 2,200, and these are just made up numbers, by the way. And then over here, this is gonna have a UUID of 2. And then let's say this one, UUID of 3, this one, food, let's say 500, and this is gonna be an expense. So of course, if we want all of the incomes, then what we're gonna do is we're gonna supply it with income. If you want all of the expenses, we're gonna supply the type with expense. So what do we want to do now? Well, now what we wanna do is we want to filter. So very simply, all we really have to do is say data.report.filter. So you want to perform this filter. And we're going to say here, we're going to get all of the reports. And what we're going to do is we're going to say if type triple equals, and we're going to say if it triple equals to income, then what we want to do is return. So what we want to do is we want to return all of the reports where that enum value is report type dot income. So actually what we can do here is before the return, we can actually assign report type to be equal to, and then if the report type, so if the type itself is equal to income, what we can very simply do is import that enum from the data. So let's go here and let's actually export that. So we're gonna say export, and we can say here report type. You can see that it auto imported is income, and then else we're gonna say that it's gonna be report type of expense. So very simply what we're doing here is we're checking the type in the parameter. If it's income, we're gonna assign this variable report type to the enum, and if it's not, then we know it's gonna be expense, so we're gonna assign it to expense. Very simple stuff we're doing here. And now what we can very simply do is just return all of the reports where their type is equal to the report type that we assigned. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Now what we can do is just test this out. So let's go over here to Postman, and let's make this request. So we should get 2 report types, both of them income. And it seems like we're getting them. As you can see here, we got them. How cool is that? Now if I went ahead and I changed this to expense, now you can see here that, well, we got an expense. Cool. And that's pretty much all it is that we need to do. Very, very simple stuff. So now what we want to do is move on to this one right here. This one's a little bit more complicated, but you know, we did this one, so I believe we can also do this one. Let's actually do that in the next video. This endpoint over here is going to be slightly more difficult. The reason for this is because we need to extract the type, whether it's income or expense, and then we need to extract the ID. So we need to extract both of these path parameters. So let's actually just begin by extracting the type. We've already done this before. What we're going to say is at param. We're going to go ahead and extract the type. So let's put that in a string. We're going to assign it to a variable called type. And then what we're going to do is we're going to give it the type of string. And now what we need to do is get the ID. And believe it or not, surprisingly, it's going to be the exact same process. It's going to be another parameter, so let's have a comma. We're going to say param. We're going to extract the ID this time. Remember, the ID right here. We're going to give it the value of ID. And this is also going to be a string. Remember, it's going to be a UUID. We're going to learn later on exactly how we can actually validate that this is a real UUID so that we don't waste our time with our request if it's not a UUID, because then it won't match any of our records anyways. So now we are going to get the type as well as the ID. Just as quick proof, let's go ahead and console.log. We're going to console them in an object. Let's get rid of this. We're going to say type and the ID. Very simple stuff. Let's open up our console and let's actually create a new request. So we're going to say add request. Let's go ahead and copy this. And then over here, we're going to do /expense /UUID1. Let's go off and send this request. We get back an empty object. And you can see here that we get back expense UUID1. So it's working the way that we expect it to. How terrific is that? So now what do we want to do? Well, let's first determine what report type we have. Over here, as you can see, we're going to do this. And then what we're going to do is we are first going to filter by report type, and then we are going to try to find the report with that ID. The reason for this is because what if somebody provides us with a report type of expense, but a UUID that is related to an income? So in that case, what we want to do is we want to just return nothing. We want to say, hey, nothing was found, sorry. However, if they went ahead and changed that report type to income, then we want to return an actual object. So let's just make sure that we're returning the correct thing. So over here, what we're going to do is a very similar filter to what we did over here. So we're going to do data.report.filter. Then we're going to say report. So we're going to say report.type is equal to report type. So that is the filter, and that's going to return an array of filtered objects. And then on this array, what we're going to do is a .find. So let's do a .find here. And let's go over here. Let's do a report. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to say report.id triple equals the ID that we have in our param. So ID. And that's really all it is that we need to do. You can get rid of this extra useless return at this point. So let's just give this a quick test. Right now, we can look at the things that we have. Let's use income and UUID of 1. Let's see what we get. So let's go here, income and UUID of 1, and you can see, barely, you can see here that this is what we get. We get the correct thing. Now, if I were to change this to an expense with a UUID of 1, remember this corresponds to an income, we should get null, which is nothing. Now, however, if I were to change this to 3, now you can see we get that. That was the purpose of the filter. So that's pretty much it. It was a little bit different in that now we're utilizing 2 params, but hopefully it wasn't too different from what we did over here. Okay, so now let's actually move on to this. And this one's going to be actually significantly different. For this endpoint, we are going to be creating a new report. Now, the reason why this is significantly different is this time we are going to be requesting data from the user. I guess in these endpoints, we were also requesting data from the user in the path parameters, but this time we are going to ask for the data inside of the request body. So what we need to do is somehow extract all of the data from that body and validate that it is the correct data. Now the validation steps we'll do a little bit later, but for now we're going to learn exactly how we can extract data from a request body. Just as an example, what we're going to do here is in our post request, once we make it inside of the request body, we're going to go over here, we're going to go to raw, and then to JSON, and we're going to pass in some data. Now the data that we're going to pass in is going to be the source and the amount. The created at as well as the updated at, we can generate that ourselves, and the type is going to be coming from the path parameter. So let's go over here, and it's going to look something like this. Source, let's say Udemy, and then we're going to say amount is going to be, let's say, 5,000. So this is what we have over here, and we need to somehow extract this in order to create our report. So let's go here and let's send off this request, and we should get in the body the string created. But what we want to do here is we want to figure out exactly, and let's get rid of this guy in the middle, by the way, it's getting kind of annoying. What we want to do inside of the controller is get that body. Now in order to do that, we're going to use another decorator that we're going to put inside of the parameter. So it's another parameter decorator, and it's going to be the body. And as you can imagine, what this is going to do is extract the body from the incoming request. So we're going to say body, and then we're going to invoke it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to assign it to a specific variable, and let's go ahead and give it a type. Now this is going to be an object where we have an amount that is going to be a number, and also we're going to have a source that is going to be a string. Now later on we're going to change this to something a little bit better, but for now we'll leave it as is. Let's go ahead and console.log the body. So I'm going to put it inside of an object, and let's open up our terminal. Let's go here. And let's go ahead and make this request, and we should get an object where we have body, and then we have this object over here. And as you can see, we're able to extract everything. This is really great. So now all it is that we need to do is just create a new report. So over here, let's just say new report, and then this is going to be equal to an object. What we need is an ID, and this is going to be a string. Now remember, this is going to be a UUID. So what we can very simply do here is actually install a library called UUID. So we're going to install the library itself as well as its associated types, because we're using TypeScript. Now what we can do here is import that. So UUID has a bunch of different algorithms that we can utilize in order to create a UUID. It has V1, V2, V3, V4, and each algorithm, it creates a UUID in a different way. The most recommended use case is V4, so what we can do is we can utilize V4. And I want to actually rename this to UUID, so in TypeScript we can just say as UUID. So essentially what we're doing here is we're taking this V4 variable and we're assigning it to UUID. Now what we can do here is very simply just invoke UUID, and what this should do is just generate a random string for us. So that's the very first thing. The next thing that we need is the source. So we can say source, and we can get that from the body.source. So the body.source. However, I think instead of just having the body like this, let's just go ahead and destructure out the amount as well as the source. So it can look like this. And we can even simplify that more to this. So we can say source, we can also say amount. We can say created at, that's going to be new date. Let's also say updated at, that's going to also be new date. And then the last thing we need is the type. And the type, we're going to have to extract that from the parameters. So let's go ahead and extract that. So we're going to say at param. We're going to say type. And this is going to be the variable type. We're going to give it a string. Now over here, what we can just, again, very simply do is actually just utilize this part right here. So we can paste that in. So if the type is triple equals to income, we'll make it this enum, else we'll make it this enum. Okay, so that is going to generate it. And again, this is pretty much assuming that the type is always either income or expense. So once we have created it, what we can very simply do now is we need to push it into our database. So we can say data.report, and then over here we can say .push, and we can push our new report. Now, if we ever made any sort of mistake in here, so for example, maybe we said that the amount is equal to the source, TypeScript is going to yell at us over here. It's saying that amount string is not equal to what we defined in the data file. So that's really good. That's the whole purpose of TypeScript. So we created, we pushed it inside of our database, and the last thing that we need to do is just return it. Let's go ahead and return the new report that we created. So let's go to Postman and let's send off this request. Seems like everything's a-okay. You can see that something has been created. Very cool. And it has this UUID. So now if we try to make a GET request to get all of them, for example, you can see here that we get the usual that we have. We're actually getting all of the incomes. Let's get all of the expenses. So we get this over here, we get this, and we also get our own. Really cool. Okay, so we actually pretty much implemented all of the logic really needed in order to understand how to implement these two. These two should be relatively easy. There's nothing that's going to be new from here. So I highly encourage that you guys kind of accomplish this and try this out on your own. I hope you guys gave that a go on your own. I am going to assume that the put request is going to be probably logistically the most complicated thing to do from a logic standpoint. However, there's nothing new in terms of Nest that we need to do in order to, well, complete this request. So in here, what we need to actually extract is three different things. We need to extract the type. We also need to extract the ID. And then we also need to extract the body. And the body is going to contain the updated either the amount or the source. Now over here, let's go ahead and extract these three params. So we're going to say @param, and we're going to say type. So let's say type over here, and we're going to say type, and this is going to be a string. We're also going to do @param, and this is going to be of type ID, or not type ID. It's going to be of type string, but we're going to extract the ID. And the last thing that we need to do is get the body. So the body over here, we're going to say @body. We're going to destructure out, or actually we're going to leave it like so. So body. And this is going to be of type, the same type that we have right here. Now we're duplicating the types. Typically what I would do is create an interface, but we're going to replace it anyway, so might as well just leave it like that. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to actually find the report itself. So I want to find that report. If that report actually exists, then we want to continue with our logic. If it doesn't exist, then, well, we don't want to continue with our logic. So let's actually copy some of the same code right over here. So this is the code that we're going to copy. Let's copy all that and let's paste it right in there. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do const, and we're going to say report is equal to this. So this is the report. Now, if we don't find any report, then what we're going to do is we're going to get null here. So we're going to say if the report doesn't exist, then let's just return. Later on, we'll learn how to throw errors. But for now, we're just going to cut it early and return. However, if the report does exist, then I want to find exactly where that exists inside of this array. Best way to do that is to determine the index of that report. So let's go here and let's say report index. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say data dot report, and then we're going to say dot find index. And we're going to do this on, we're not going to do a filter because again, we want to find the location. We already found that the report exists and it is of the correct type over here. Now we need to find the location inside of this array. And remember, this array is going to have a mix-up of both report types that are income and expense. So we're going to say here find index, and in here we're going to say the condition is going to be, come on VS Code, where the condition is going to be report.id is equal to, and maybe we should change this to report to update. Report to update. Just so that, just so we don't have a lot of this mix up. Over here where the report.id is equal to the report to update.id. Now once we find this index, all we really have to do is perform the update. So over here, what we can say is data dot report of that index. So of that report index is going to be equal to, and then what we're going to do is we're going to assign it to an empty object. However, what we're going to do is we're going to grab everything inside of this object and we're going to destructure it out. And then we're going to grab everything inside of the body, and then we're also going to destructure it out. Now, if you notice any potential problems with this solution, well, that's okay. I'm going to leave it there on purpose. There are problems with it, but later on we'll fix it. Do not worry. However, this is how we're going to perform this update. And now what we're going to do is return that new updated report. So let's go ahead and save that for now. And let's actually just give this a quick go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this new report. Oh, actually, this is a GET request. Let's go here and let's create a new report. And let's say by accident, it's not 5,000, it's actually 4,000. So I want to update the amount. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to go to the update. So the update. And what I need to do first is grab the ID of the report, because that's the ID that I want to update it as. Actually, before I do that, let's go here and let's view it. So you can see here, we have it, and it has amount of 5,000. So now let's go to update. Let's pass in this ID in the body. What we're going to do is we are going to provide raw JSON. And then in here, we're going to say source Udemy. Now, if we're only updating the amount, then we probably don't want to use source. We probably don't want to provide source. And we actually don't really have to. But let's just do it for now anyways. We're going to say 4,000. So let's go ahead and send this request off. You can see here that now we actually get this request over here, and you can see that it is of 4,000. If, however, I decide to change the ID to, I don't know, something else, like 6, you can see we get nothing back. So it seems like everything is fine. Now, if I try to make a request to get all of them and scrolled all the way down, you can see that the update works okay. So this one was by far the most complicated one. I hope you guys got the gist of what's going on here. In the next video, let's complete the implementation with the delete. The last thing that we need to do is figure out exactly how to delete a report. So to do this, of course, what we need to do is extract out the param, the ID. So let's go here and let's go ahead and do that. And that's going to be of type string. The first thing that we are going to need to do is find the index of the element that we want to delete. So let's go here and let's say report index, and that is going to be equal to data.report.find index, and we're going to say report, and we're going to say where the report.id triple equals the ID that we have in our parameter. If the report index is equal to -1, so if the report index is not found, what actually ends up happening is that it's equal to -1. So it's not going to be equal to null, it's going to be equal to -1. So if over here, what we're going to say is if the report index equals to -1, which means we haven't found anything, let's just return. We're going to throw an error later, but for now, we're going to return. Now, if we pass this if block, that means there is something in there. And what we want to do is we want to get rid of it. So what we can do here is we can filter it out, or we can actually use the splice method. So what we can say here is data.report, and then we can use .splice. And then what we can do here is provide the index where we want to start the splice, and that's going to be this index. And then we need to state how many elements do we want to splice during that index and after. We're going to say just 1. Very simply, if this, for example, is index of 1, what it's going to do is it's going to start over here, and it's only going to splice 1 because we provided the value of 1. However, if we provided the value of 2, for example, it's going to start here, splice this one out, and then splice this one out. So this just ensures that it's going to splice out exactly the one that we want. And this is actually going to mutate the real array. Now, at the end of the day, what do we want to return here? Do we want to return the deleted report? That kind of makes no sense. So maybe we just return nothing, and we give it a status code of 204, which is no content. So over here, we're just going to go ahead and return. Now you might be thinking, well, how in the world are we going to give it a new status code? Because right now, let's just go ahead and create a report. Let's create this new report. Let's go ahead and look at it. So over here, you can see it. Now what I want to do is I want to delete it. So if I go to delete and I pass this in, you can see that, okay, it's deleted. However, the status code is 200. Just to make sure that the functionality works, this should be gone. And it is. Okay. But now what we want to do is, well, we want to change the status code to 204, just no content. In order to do this, you might have guessed, we need a decorator. We actually need the HTTP code decorator. And this is very simple. We just put it right on top of the method, and we're going to say that this method is going to return a 204. So let's give this another go. So let's go here, let's create this. And let's get the ID. Oh my goodness, come on. Where are you? There we go. Let's grab that ID. Let's go over here to the delete. And let's pass in this ID. And now watch the status code, 204, no content. So that is how we can change status codes. And that pretty much, concludes all of the endpoints. All of the endpoints are really just working the way that we want them to. However, there is a significant number of flaws with the way that we did things. Like a huge amount of flaws. And I did them on purpose. This isn't a mistake. I did them on purpose so we can really analyze all of the flaws and see why they are flaws. So let's actually go ahead and try to fix some of these problems in the next videos. Hello everybody, and welcome to this brand new section. In the last section, we implemented all of the endpoints as well as the endpoint logic. But at the very end of that section, I also said that the way that we did things are pretty much wrong. There are things that are correct, but there's a lot of flaws in the way that we done this implementation. So let's actually take a look at some of these flaws. So let's begin with the first one. Right now, our business logic is inside of the controller. Now let's remember what the controller is for. The controller is simply just for creating endpoints. So right now what we're doing is we're bloating our controllers with all of this business logic. What we need to do is we need to find another entity to put all of this business logic in instead of the controller. The controller really just should be for creating endpoints, getting the parameter, getting the body, etc. So that is the very first thing. The next thing, and this is a very important one, there's really no validation at this point. I said no form, but there's no validation at this point. Let me explain what I mean by this. Right now, if I wanted to make a request to get all of the reports, I could very, very easily do report/pickles. This is something I could do. And at this point, we're not validating any of that. If we go over here, I could also make a request to get a specific report, but instead of putting a valid UUID, I can put in, I don't know, 3, which is obviously not a UUID. So we need validation in that front. Now at the end of the day, if we put in something that's invalid, we're just going to return null. But why even perform this expensive query if we know we're not going to find anything because this is not a valid UUID? Here is where it gets even trickier. Right here in the body, we are passing in the amount and the source, and we're expecting that that amount and source are a number and a string respectively. And then we're obviously going to add that inside of our database. However, what if somebody in the body didn't abide by these rules? Let me go ahead and show you what I mean. So I'm going to go here. Let's go ahead and get rid of all these other requests. And let's go and create a new report. And remember, in the new report, we provide a source and an amount. What if instead of the source being a string, they passed in an array of objects that has food as a property and then pickles as a value, for example, something ridiculous like that. And then for the amount, they passed in false as a boolean. Well, this obviously shouldn't work in our application. However, when we send it off, it does work. You can see here we have source, which is an array of objects. We have the amount, which is false. Not good. Not good at all. So we need to somehow validate that the body that the user passes in is actually the correct body. This is actually even more apparent over here with the update. Because now over here, what we're doing is we're actually destructuring out the body. So for example, right here, what we can actually do when we want to update, let me go grab this as well as the ID that was generated. So let's say we want to update and we want to update to this, and let's grab this ID and let's paste that in there. So what we can do is we can even update to this stuff. So for example, we can even change this amount to an object that has the key amount and then maybe a number. So we can even perform this update. But even worse, we can start adding additional properties. So we can do animal and then rhino. We can start adding all these additional properties, and there's going to be updated and added into our report. Not good at all, obviously. If I go over here and make a fetch, you can see, okay, everything is fine, except once I reach the last one, you can see how ridiculous it's looking. So again, we need to validate the body and make sure that it's the right one. And over here, of course, validate the ID just to ensure that we don't even hit this condition, the -1 condition. So there's a lot of things that are going wrong. In this section, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on fixing this over here, finding somewhere else to put the business logic, but in the next section, we're going to work on the validation. In the last video, we talked about how we shouldn't put our business logic inside of the controllers. So where should we? Well, as you know, there's multiple entities in Nest, and controllers are responsible for creating endpoints. Now, in order to put your business logic, we're going to put that inside of another entity known as services. So let's actually go over here And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the app.service.ts file. And like usual, what I'm going to do is I'm going to completely get rid of everything in it. For now, we're going to go ahead and build this from scratch. So let me go ahead and save it. So what we want to do is we want to create a service. This is where all of the business logic is going to live. At the end of the day, what ends up happening is the controller interacts with the service. It calls the methods inside of the service, and therefore everything works exactly the same. However, we're separating our concerns. Now remember, all entities inside of Nest are classes. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say class. We're going to call this app service. So app service like so. Now in here, we're going to have a bunch of different methods that are going to have this business logic. So for example, we're going to have a method that's going to get all of the reports. So get all reports, kind of similar to what we have in the controller. And it's actually a common practice to have this method be called exactly the same as this method over here. Now, what this method is going to do is it's going to take in some parameters. So what are the parameters that it needs to take in? Well, it really just needs to take in the type of the report that it wants to get. So over here, what we can do is say type. And we can call this type actually the enum type. Let's go over here. What happened here? We have double now. Let's quickly save that. What did I do here? How did that even happen? Get rid of that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to grab the enum type from the data. So from source/data, I'm going to grab that enum type, which is the report type. And also let's grab the data itself, because we're going to be interacting with the data. Over here, we're going to do report type. And what we're going to do is, well, we are going to do something like this. We're just going to have this logic. So once we have the report type, what we're going to do is we're going to do this logic right here. So this is where the business logic is going to live. This right over here. We can even change this to type like this, because that's what we called it inside of this parameter. That's all it is that we have to do. The last thing that we have to do is export this out, because it is used by the module. So now, very simply, what we can do inside of the controller is just call this method instead of having this business logic in. And this actually presents another problem. How are we going to get this app service inside of the app controller? Now remember, this is a class. It's not a function that we can just export. We have to instantiate this in some way. So how do we do that? Well, let's actually talk about that in the next video. We created this service, but now what we want to do is utilize it inside of the controller. How do we do that? Well, there's actually another entity that's going to allow us to manage dependencies within our directory, and that is the modules. So the modules is used for adding and managing dependencies between our files. So you might be thinking, why in the world do we want to export this? Well, it's actually being used inside of the app.module.ts file. Right here we have an object, and inside of this object we have imports, we have controllers, we also have providers. So in this app.module.ts, we're saying that the app.controller is the controller, and inside of here we have this providers, and then we have this app service. And right here, what this is allowing us to do is inject this dependency in everything inside of this directory, which is the source directory. So because of this, inside of the app controller, we can actually utilize the app service. We can't do that if this was empty. Let me show you what I mean. Now, one thing that we missed inside of the app service, in order to actually inject it as a dependency, we have to mark it as injectable. So to do this, what we need to do is import a decorator. So over here, we're going to say from @NestJS common, we're going to get a decorator called injectable. We're going to go ahead and mark it as injectable. Now what we can do is inside of the controller, remember this is just a very simple class. Inside of the controller we can have our constructor, and we can just very simply inside of the constructor do a private read only, and then we can give our service a name that we want injected into it. So we can call this, for example, let's call this app service. Really, we should probably name this to something else, and we will later on, but for now we'll call it app service. And then we can import the class itself and then type the app service with that class. So over here we can say import, and we want to import from the app service class, and then over here we can do app service. And believe it or not, that is all it is that we need to do. So in here, what we can do is get rid of this logic and just do this, because we're referring to something in this class. Then we can do app service dot get all reports, and we can supply it with the report type. That's all we have to do at this point. Very simple. And we can even put this logic in there. However, this logic is okay to be in the controller. Just to prove to you that it works, let's go ahead and go to Postman, and let's send off this request, and you can see that it's working a-okay. Now let's actually try to remove this app service from here, and now let's try to make this request again. You can see we're getting an error. Why is that? Well, let's go ahead and inspect our terminal. That's the best way of doing things. So let's go here. You can see that, well, we're getting an error. You can see that, hey, we are dependent on this app service, but we are not defining it inside of the app module. That's pretty much all it is. So now let's go ahead and save that, and now everything is working fine. So the module, it seems a little daunting at first, but it's really not. Really, it's just a way where we can manage all of our dependencies. At this point, it seems a little bit unnecessary, but when we start having multiple controllers, not just one controller, so right now we're working with one controller, but in a real application, we're gonna have multiple controller files, multiple services, multiple modules, etc. What we need to do is we need to manage the dependencies between them, because we might have one service file that depends on another service file. So we can do that inside of the module. We're going to see that a little bit in this project, but we're going to see that a whole lot more in the next project. In this video, what we're going to do is refactor all of our business logic inside of the app.service.ts file. Now we went ahead and we did it for this method right over here, but now we need to do it for all the other ones. So let's go over here. Let's create another method called getReportById. And this is going to take in the type, which is going to be the report type. It also needs to take in the ID, which is going to be a string. So over here, what we can very simply do is grab all of this. Let's grab all of that. Let's just paste that in there. We're going to go ahead and return. And then over here, we can just change this to type. That's really all it is that we need to do. So now over here, we can just return this dot app service dot get report by ID, and we can pass in the report type itself, and we can also pass in the ID. So let's go ahead and do that. Save that, and that's done. So now over here, we need to create a report. Let's create a method for this. So create a report. This, as usual, is going to take in the report type, and it also needs to take in the body. So this is going to be the amount as well as the source. So over here, we can just say, we can really call this whatever. We can call this data if we want to. And this is going to be the amount, that is a string. And we have here the body that is also, or the amount is not going to be a string, it's going to be a number. And then the source is going to be a string. Now this is actually the right way of typing things inside of a service. Inside of this over here, the controller where we're getting the body, this isn't the right way of typing things. We'll talk about how we can type things later, but in here this is the right way of doing it. So might as well actually just put all this in an interface. So over here we can say report data, and this is going to be of type this. So we can go ahead and grab that. And we can even type it. Maybe we can even get rid of the data itself. We can just grab this and put that in there. So over here, what we can even do is just destructure out the amount as well as the source. Good idea. So now let's go ahead and, grab this. Let's go ahead and grab all of this logic. Let's paste it in there. We're going to need to grab the UUID. So let's go here. Let's grab that UUID, paste it in there. So one thing that we are missing is the type. So the type here is either equal to income or, I think that's okay. I think that should work fine. I hope so. Because over here we actually typed that the report type is either going to be an income or an expense. So I think that's fine. So I think that's okay. So that's really all it is that we have to do. Let's go ahead and save that. And then in here, look at all this stuff that we're going to get rid of. We're going to get rid of all this logic. So over here, we're just going to say return this.appService.createReport. We're going to pass in the type, which is going to be the type here. And we're also going to pass in the amount as well as the source. So say amount and then source. Now over here, let's actually do the same logic to get the report type. Like so. And then in here, we can just pass in the report type, save that. And here we can just pass in the type itself, like that. Okay, so that should work. We'll test it out later. Now let's move on to the put. So this should be update report. So update report. Now what is this going to take? This is going to actually take a bunch of things. It's going to take in the type. It's going to take in the report itself. And it's also going to take in the ID. So let's pass in the ID right here in the middle. This is going to be a string. Okay, awesome. So let's go ahead and save that. And in here, there's a lot of different logic that we need. So let's just grab all of this logic here. From here, let's cut that all out. And let's paste it in the method. So let's fix this to type. And over here we have the body. We can even just extract it like body like this. Now one thing that I actually missed is we should also update the updated at. So updated at, we can also over here do new date. That's really all it is that we need to do. So let's now copy this. And in here, what we can do is just return this dot app service dot update report. And then what we need to do is pass in the report type. Let's do that. Let's pass in the ID and let's pass in the body. Very simple. Last thing that we need to do is the this controller right here. So all we need to do for this, and this one's actually simple. We can actually extract all of this stuff and put it inside of the delete. So over here we can say delete report. This is only going to take in an ID, which is a string. And over here, we can just pass this logic in, Let's save that. In here, we can just do return this dot delete report, pass in the ID. So you might be thinking, well, this is actually a lot of work for simply moving our logic. Why do we have to do this? This doesn't really seem that necessary. Well, the reason why we want to do this is now we can actually use this service elsewhere in our code. So maybe it's needed, maybe we need to, get all of the reports in another service that we create or another controller that we create. Now, instead of having all of our business logic in the controller, and the controller is something we can't really import back and forth, we have it inside of our service, and we can actually do all of these imports, and we can do all of the dependency injections. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that wasn't too bad of a refactor. In the next video, we're just going to do a little quick test just to make sure that everything is working fine. In this video, what we're going to do is a quick manual test of all of these different endpoints just to make sure that everything is working a-okay. So let's just go ahead with the get request. Let's go ahead and try to make this. So over here, you can see that we are getting all of our reports. If I were to change this to expense, however, we should get back nothing. And, well, no, actually, no, we get back our array right over here of food. So this works just the way that we expect it to. Let me go ahead over here. Let's actually change the name of this request to get report. We're going to go ahead and save that, save this, save it all. And over here, let's actually change this to UID 3, and you can see that this is working. Awesome. Maybe I can zoom out once more like this. Now let's go ahead and try to create an income report. Again, we can always make this an incorrect body. We'll learn how to fix it in the next section, but for now, let's just make sure that it is correct. So we can say source. What's another source of income? Let's say Amazon affiliate, or FBA. Let's do that. I don't know how to spell affiliate. Amazon affiliate. So we can create. This is really good. If I go to get all income, we should get another one. We do. So let's try to update this. Let's try to update this to maybe 6,000 or something. So let's go here, let's add that. Let's get rid of this, Rhino. Let's change the amount to 5,500 or whatever. Let's actually even get rid of the source completely because we should be able to optionally pick what we want to update. And you can see here that we can update it. Last thing that we want to do, I don't think we've tested this yet. Let's do the delete. We actually probably have. Let's say delete report. Let's save that. And this time we should get a no content. Ooh, we're getting an internal server error. Why is that? Okay, this is interesting. So let's actually diagnose why we get this error. So let's go here, close this off. Maximum call stack exceeded. Okay, so let's refresh this. And let's give this a call again just to see what happens. Okay, so we are getting an error. Okay, this is good. Let's see how I debug things. I wasn't actually expecting this error. So let's figure out how I would debug things. So let's go to the delete. And over here, okay, I can almost pretty much I see exactly what's going wrong here, and actually this makes the error over here make sense. So over here, what we're doing is it's saying maximum call stack exceeded, which means we're continuously calling things over and over again, and eventually, once we continuously call things in an infinite loop, it's just gonna say, hey, you hit your maximum, there's an error that's going on clearly in your code. I hope you can see exactly what the error is by just looking at what I'm doing here. So over here, I have this delete report method inside of the controller, and then what I'm doing is I'm returning this .delete report. So I'm actually calling the same method inside of this method. And then once I call this again, then it's going to call it again and again and again and again and again forever. This is actually kind of known as in algorithms as a recursive function when the function calls itself. But we should have some sort of baseline for when we want to stop the recursiveness nature of this function. Obviously here we don't want to. So the mistake that I did was we should have app service here. So we should call this.appService.delete. And that should fix the issue. So let's actually give this a quick go again. You can see now we get no content. And if I try to get all of the reports, remember Amazon FBA, if I try to get them again, you can see that it's gone. Okay, so everything is working a-okay. In the next video, let's actually start doing some of the wonderful validation. Hello, my good friends. In this video, what we're gonna start doing is validating the incoming request. Now, I quickly mentioned exactly why and what we are gonna be validating, but let's actually just look at a quick little illustration here. So the first thing that we need to validate is the ID that we get back. Is it a UUID? Why do we want to do this? Well, all of our records inside of our database, which is just an array, every single record is going to have an ID that is a UUID. If the ID that we pass in right over here is not a UUID, then there's no point of actually completing all of this expensive logic. We know we're not going to find anything, so might as well catch that over here and throw some sort of error. So that's the very first thing that we want to do. The next thing that we want to do is we want to validate that the body is correct. So over here in the body, and I showed you this in the last video, over here we're expecting an amount that's a number, a source that is a string. However, there's no real way at the moment with what we're doing of validating that the amount is actually going to be a number or the source is going to be a string. In the last video, I made the amount an array of objects and I made the source a Boolean. So we need to somehow validate this so we don't really affect the things that we're doing over here. The last thing that we need to validate is the type. So remember over here, we have this type. We need to make sure that this is either income or expense. We don't want to, we don't want people to put bananas in there. We want them to put either income or expense. So we need to somehow validate this. Now over here, we're going to begin with this one, validating that the ID is UUID. And this is actually the simplest thing to do. And it's going to get a little bit more and more difficult for each validation. However, I hope you guys understand them. It's going to be still relatively simple. So let's get into it. The first thing that I want to validate is that the ID is actually a UUID. So this ID over here, this ID over here, this ID over here. As a quick reminder, the request is going to look like something like this. So /report /income and then / whatever the UUID is. We want to make sure that this is really a UUID and maybe not just like a number like this or just a random string like so. So how do we do that? Well, in NestJS, there's actually a bunch of entities that we can utilize in order to validate things. Now, these entities, or this entity, is known as a pipe. So a pipe is an entity that can, one, transform things and validate them. Let me illustrate this here. So over here, inside of NestJS common, what we can do is we can just say pipe, and we can see all of the different pipes that we can utilize. So you can see a parse float pipe, parse boolean pipe, parse whatever pipe. So I'm going to actually just grab this parse int pipe for now, just to illustrate this. We're gonna remove it later. And what I'm going to do is I am going to, inside of this param right over here, this is the ID that we want to validate, in the decorator, as a second parameter, I'm going to say parse in type like so. So I hope this makes a little bit of sense. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and make this request right over here. So this request right over here. So localhost /report /expense /7. So that is the ID. Even though that's not a UUID, we'll keep it as such right now. So over here, let's just go ahead and console.log the ID. And also what I want to do is I want to console.log the type of ID. And actually, let's remove the pipe for now, and then I'm going to add it later just to see what it is. So this is without the pipe. I'm going to go ahead and send off this request. We get back nothing. And if I were to open up my terminal just to see the log, you can see here that we get the ID of 7, and we also get the type of string. All right, so this seems like it's working a-okay. Now the reason why it's a string, even though this is 7, is because anything that's coming from the path parameter is going to be a string. I hope that is clear. So what we want to do is, let's say our ID is always a number. It's always a number. What we want to do is we want to ensure that you're always passing in a number to the path parameter. And also, what we want to do is we want to convert that number from a string to, well, a number type. How do we do that? Well, that's where we utilize the parse int pipe. So what this parse int pipe is going to do is it's going to check the ID, and if it is a string number, it's going to validate that and say, okay, that's fine. If it's not, it's going to throw an error. And then if it's actual string number and it passes the validation, it's going to parse it into an integer. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to go ahead and save this again, make this exact request again. And now you can see that it is 7, the number. You can see that the color changed, and well, you can also see that the type of it changed as well. So that's exactly what this does. Now, what if I tried to do, instead of /7, let me zoom in here once more, I did, slash just some random non-number string. Let's send off this request. You can see that we're getting a 400 error. So we get a validation error, bad request. So that's really what pipes are doing. And there's different types of pipes out there. So there's a parse Boolean type. So, you can probably imagine what this is going to do. This is going to ensure that what we're passing in the path parameter is either a Boolean or not a Boolean. And this could also be put in query parameters that we'll talk about a little bit later. We have a parse enum type, parse whatever type. So you can see that there's a bunch of different types that we can use. So what do we want to use? Well, we want to use this parse UUID pipe. So what it's going to do is ensure that what we pass in is always going to be a UUID. And that's really all we have to do. So over here, what we can say is UUID. And now, let's try to make this request again. Not going to work. It's going to say, hey, we expected a UUID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly create something here. And now I'm going to grab this. And I'm going to go to the get, or the get1. And now I'm going to pass in a real UUID. And now you can see that it's working. Now we're just getting nothing back. So you can see that it's passing the validation pipe. That's pretty much it. I hope that's pretty clear. So let's go here. And let's actually pass that pipe into all of the IDs. So over here, we're going to parse the UUID pipe. And over here, parse the UUID pipe. I think that's all of them. So that is the very first thing. Now what we're going to do in the next video is actually move on to the next thing that we want to validate, which I'll introduce in the next video. Now that we have validated the ID with the parse UUID type or pipe, let's actually figure out exactly how we can validate this type right over here. Now this can either be income or expense. So we're going to need to utilize another pipe for this. Specifically, what we're going to utilize is the enum pipe. Now this is going to be a little bit different in the way that we use it. Instead of very simply saying parse enum pipe over here, and actually if we save this, you can see we actually start getting errors. So we get dependency injection errors. So instead of using it like this, what we need to do is instantiate this instead. So over here, we say new parse enum pipe, and then we pass in the enum. So the enum, well, we already have it as the report type. And that's really all it is that we need to do. So now what we can very simply do is go here And if I were to make this request, you can see that it works. And actually this is a GET request. So let's go over here. You can see that this is fine. This is working a-okay. However, if I change this to something that's not an expense like bananas, it's going to yell at us saying that, hey, this is not expected. And that's really all it is that we have to do. So what we can do is we can add this pipe inside of every single instance where we try to get the type. And that's really all it is. And that's fine. That's it. All right, that's really all that we need to do. And now what we need to do is validate the body. This is where it's going to get a little bit trickier. This isn't going to involve any pipes, but rather another entity known as a data transfer object. In this video, what we're going to start doing is validating the body, essentially ensuring that the body has an amount that is a number and a source that's a string, and the types are correct. That's what we want to do. Now we can't really utilize a pipe for this. Instead, we're going to utilize something known as a DTO. A DTO is something that we can utilize to transform and validate the body as well as the outgoing response. So we actually need to create this DTO manually. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new directory called DTOs. And then inside of the DTOs directory, I am going to create a report.dto.ts file. Now, in order to create this DTO and to have this validation, what we need to do is install a few packages. So there's two real packages we need to install. We're going to have to do an npm install on class validator, so class-validator, and also class-transformer. So let's go ahead and install that. And that's really all it is that we need to install. Now, all we have to do is create the DTO. Now, all entities are classes. So to create the DTO, let's go ahead and say class. And we're going to call this create report DTO, because this is the body for creating a report. We want to validate that this is going to be, well, again, I've said this a million times, but this is an amount that's a number, a source that's a string. So let's go here. And how are we going to validate it? Well, the first thing that I need to do is define the type of the thing that's going to be in this class. So we're going to have an amount that is a number. We're also going to have a source that's a string. So now what we can actually do is extract this DTO and actually utilize it as a type. So let's go ahead and export this. And inside of the controller, what we can do is import that in. So we can import this DTO. So we're going to say from DTOs, you want the report DTO, create report DTO. And then in here, in the body, we can just say this. And this works just fine. Get rid of that curly braces. So this works just fine. It's typing the exact same way that we want it to. All right. But however, this isn't going to do any validation. This is just typing. In order to get the real validation in, what we need to utilize is a bunch of decorators from the class validator library that we installed. Now let's begin with validating this. So we want to make sure that this is a number. Okay. So what we can do here is get the isNumber decorator and put it right on top. So they can say isNumber. But there's actually more validations that we want to do. It's actually not enough to just make sure that it's a number. We have to make sure that it's a positive number. So if it's an income, we obviously want to make sure that, hey, you are making a positive number, which is 500, 1,000. And if it's an expense, even though it's coming out of our pocket, we want to make sure that you're losing a positive number. Really, I mean, I know there's cases where there's negative money, but in this application, we want to make sure that everything is positive. We mark it as an expense or a income with the type rather than the negativity of it. So we want to make sure that this is positive. So we can actually use another decorator. There's so many different decorators, like is passport number, is phone number, is port, is positive, is postal code. there's a bunch of decorators that we can use to validate it. So over here is positive. Now over here, well, we want this to be a string. So we can say is string. And another thing is, well, we don't want the user to provide us an empty string. So we can also say is not empty. So is not empty. So we don't want an empty string. So you can use that as another decorator. And that's all it is that we have to do. So let's actually give this a quick go. Now don't be surprised if this doesn't work. So we're going to go here. We're going to go and try to create something. So let's go here and we should be able to create this. It works. However, let's say I made this true. It still works. So that's kind of surprising. I thought we did this decorator. Well, what we need to do is tell NestJS that we want it to perform this global validation. Now, in order to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to the main.ts file. We didn't talk about this, but this is exactly where the application is being booted up. So we have this thing called Nest Factory, and this is going to generate a new Nest application, as you can see here. And inside of that Nest Factory, we're passing in the root module. Again, we can have multiple modules in our application. However, we have one root module that's going to be related to all the other modules. We're going to pass that module in to create our Nest app. And then we're going to listen on port 3000. That's why we're running on port 3000. This is just a function. We're going ahead and invoking it. Now, another thing that we want to do before we listen is do app.use global pipes. Remember, pipes are for validation. So we're telling it, hey, we want to use a global pipe. Now, what is the pipe? Well, we're going to import it from Nest common, and it's called validation pipe. At Nest common, we're going to say validation pipe. And then over here, we're going to instantiate a new validation pipe. So validation pipe, and we're just going to go ahead and invoke it like this. Now we can supply it with some options, and we will later, but for now, let's just go ahead and do that. Essentially what this says is, hey, we want to enable global pipes within our Nest application. So now if I went ahead and tried to send this request, ta-da, you can see that the source must be a string. In fact, we can also make it a string if we want to, but an empty string. And you can see here, source should not be empty. What great validation. And we can use, again, any form of validation in here. We're actually going to look at more validation types in the next project, but you guys probably get the point here. So now if we supply it with something real, it works. All right, well, that is a great introduction to DTOs. Let's now go ahead and do the exact same thing, but for the update. Now this one's going to be a little trickier. The reason why is because what we want is in the body, we want the update and the, the source as well as the amount to be optional, because we might want to update both. We might want to update one over the other. So we have to figure out how we can do that. Encourage that you guys do this validation on your own. What we want to do is we want to validate the body. Now you might be thinking we can use the exact same DTO. However, this time what we want to do is we want to validate that obviously the amount is a number and the source is a string, but you can optionally give us one or the other. So for example, if we go over here, in this case, we're not providing the source, but we're only providing the amount, meaning we only want to update the amount. We might also want to update the source only. And over here, maybe change the source to YouTube. Now, if we do decide to add something, it has to be of that same type. So we can't have source equal to true. However, we don't have to provide both. So we need to create a DTO that supports this. Let's go ahead and do that right now. So over here, let's go ahead and export a new DTO. So we're going to say class, and we're going to say update report DTO. And then it's going to actually have the exact same validations as we have here, except it's going to have one extra decorator. This decorator is going to be is optional. This basically makes sure that this is optional. So we're going to say is optional. So what's happening here is we're saying that this is optional. However, if you do provide it, it has to be a positive number. We can do the same thing over here. Is optional. And that's pretty much it. So now what we can do is we can grab this, or we can just import it inside of the controller. Now in here, we can get rid of this type and we can just say update report DTO. And I actually auto imported it. We can go ahead and save this and you can see that it's working a-okay. Another thing that we can actually do is go to the update report, and over here you can see that the body is of type report. However, type report you can see is it's saying that this is a required field. So over here what we can do is we can add another interface called update report and say that these types are optional, just for better typing in TypeScript. Let's say here, let's do that, and that's fine. Okay, so that's pretty much all it is that we need to do. Let's just give it a quick test. Let's go ahead and create a report. So we created this report, and now we want to update, let's say, the source to something that's more meaningful. So over here, let's go ahead and update the source to YouTube. You can see that it works. However, if I said source is equal to true, you can see we're getting an error. We can also change it to Udemy. And over here, we can also change the amount to 3,000. So we can do all of that as well. That validation works. Okay, now there is one potential problem. So even though it's validating that this exists, we can also add additional properties. So we can add, I don't know, gorilla, and we can say banana for some reason. And if we actually update this, you can see that it works and it actually adds inside of the object. Not good at all. So how can we somehow get rid of this additional things that are not defined inside of our DTO? We'll talk about that in the next video. In order to make sure that the only properties that we pass into our body are the ones that we defined in our DTO, there's one really small configuration that we have to do. All we have to do is go to the main.ts file, and in the validation pipe, we're going to supply it with some options. And so the first option is multiple options that we can use, and we're going to look at a bunch of them throughout this course. However, the first option is going to be whitelist. By default, this is false, but we want to set it to true. Basically what this does is it whitelists anything that is not defined in the DTO, meaning that it completely gets rid of it. Let me show you what I mean. Now let's go to the controller, and what I'm going to do is I am going to look at this body, and I'm going to console.log the body in this put request. Let's go ahead and console.log the body. And for now, I'm going to set this to false, which was the default. So I'm going to go ahead and make this request. Let's go over here. Let's go to our terminal. Close this off. Let's go here, and you can see that our body has source Udemy amount 3000 and gorilla banana. However, now if I set this to true, let's make this request again. You can see that gorilla banana is gone. And so what this option does is it looks at our DTOs and any additional properties, it completely gets rid of it. And this is good. This is a really good thing for not just the purpose of making our app functional, but also for security reasons. We don't want people passing in random stuff inside of the body that is not intended by our application. It could cause a big security risk. So we would want to do this definitely. So that's pretty much it. That's all we really have to do in terms of validation. We have completely validated everything. And now we're ensuring that anything that we get in is proper. However, then of course we have to start making the requests and stuff. But at least in the user side, we're making sure that everything is a-okay. So that's pretty much it, and that actually concludes this section. Welcome to a brand new section. In this section, we're gonna figure out exactly how we can manipulate outgoing responses. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go over here to the data, and let's just look at how the data is structured. So you can see here that the data inside of our database, which again is just a local array, is structured where the properties are in a snake case. So you can see here, if we have more than 2 letters, we're separating them by an underscore. So, well, snake case. I hope you understand that. And when we send off a response, or when we want to actually get the data, we of course get the data in that format, so snake case. However, what if what we wanted to do is transform this to camel case? So instead of getting it back like this, we get it back like this. So like that. How do we do that? Another thing is, what if we do not want to return the updated at? We only want to return certain properties. Again, how is it that we can accomplish something like this? You might be thinking, well, what we could do, most definitely, is selectively pick what we want to return back. We don't have to return back everything here. We can just do something like this. Return back an object where the ID is the new report.id. And you guys probably get the idea. Let's just do this one as a whole. So source, new report.source. And then the amount is going to be new report.amount. And then for created at, we can actually have that as camel case, like so. And then we can say new report dot created underscore at. And then we can actually completely omit the updated at because we don't want to send that. And then we can do the type, the new report dot type. So we can do something like this for sure for every single controller that we have here, or every single service. However, in my opinion, this isn't a great idea, and the main reason for this is that there's actually better ways of doing this. You can see that this is getting a little long and a little cumbersome. So there's actually better ways of doing this inside of NestJS. And it actually has to do with DTOs and another entity that we haven't talked about, which are interceptors. So in the next video, what we're gonna do is actually create a DTO for the outgoing response. So what we've been doing so far is making a DTO for the body, for the request body. If you go over here to the controller, you can see that we have been creating DTOs for the request body. However, we can also make a DTO for the response. Eventually, what is this method going to return? So let's go ahead and do that in the next video. Let's go ahead and create the DTO for the response. Now this is actually going to be one DTO that we're going to be applying to almost every single route handler that we want here. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go to the report.dto.ts file. And then in here, we're going to create or export a new DTO. So this is going to be a report, let's call it response DTO. So what we're going to do here is we're going to type everything. So we're going to have a ID that's a string, a source that's a string, and amount that's a number. Let's go here, put out that number. We also have a created at, that's a date. Let's also put a create or updated at. Updated at, that is a date as well as a type. That is a report type. All right, so this is looking pretty good, and notice that I also auto imported the report type. So this is good. However, what we want to do now is we want to be able to transform and do all these different things with our data. Now, when we installed this class validator package, we also installed something else called class transformer. And over here, the class transformer package, it comes with a bunch of different decorators that we can utilize. Specifically, we were going to utilize the exclude as well as the expose decorators. So these two decorators we are going to be utilizing. Let's begin with the exclude. So the exclude is going to allow us to exclude certain properties inside of our object that we want to return. Now what we want to do is we want to exclude this updated at. So over here, what we can do is we can do an at exclude, and we can go ahead and, well, invoke it like a decorator. So that's going to allow us to actually completely get rid of this updated at. So now what do we want to do? Well, we're exporting this report response, and let's call it also a DTO. So let's go ahead and actually utilize this and just see if it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the controllers, and inside of each controller method that we have here, we're going to specify what this controller method is going to return. And it's going to return, well, we want it to eventually return something that fits this right over here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And we're going to say that this get all reports, it returns a report response DTO, and I'm going to go ahead and auto import it. Now this is yelling at me over here because now the app itself is not returning that same DTO. So we're going to have to do the exact same thing inside of the app.service file. So let's go ahead over here and specify that this is going to return a new response DTO. Now the reason why this is failing is it's going to return an array of new response DTOs. So let's go ahead and specify that, as well as we need to go ahead and grab this. So it's returning an array of it. Over here, we need to specify the same thing. That we're going to return an array. All right. Over here, this is going to return the object itself. So we can just say report response DTO, as well as over here. This one's going to return the object itself. Updated at, that's going to return that. The deleted at is going to return no content, so we don't have to worry about that one. Over here, let's also specify the exact same thing. So let's go over here. Inside of here, let's specify that we're going to return that. Specify that we're going to return this. Let's specify that we're going to return this. And here, we're not returning that, so that's okay. Okay, so now let's actually give this a go and see if it works. So I'm just going to go ahead and try to get all of the reports, and I should not see the updated at. Spoiler alert, it's not going to work because there's a lot of other configurations that we need to do. But let's just go ahead and send it off. It doesn't work. Okay, so there's actually a bunch of different things that we need to do in order to get this to work. And now some of the stuff might make sense. However, some of the other stuff might be a little bit more complicated and might need a little bit more exploring. So let's begin with some of the simpler stuff, and then we'll move on to the more complex ones. Let's begin with the very first thing that we need to do to get this thing to work. Now, right here, let's quickly talk about exactly how we're utilizing the DTO. Right now, what we're doing is we're just specifying the return type of the function, of the method that we end up calling. This is fine and dandy, but this inherently isn't going to do anything when it comes to transforming our response. So instead, what we actually need to do is return this report response DTO. Remember, this is a class, so we can actually instantiate this to create an object. So what we can do is we can instantiate this, and then we can pass in the object that we have created. And then it can do the transformation, and well, we can return the object that was instantiated from this DTO. Let me quickly show you what I mean by that. Let's begin with this one because it's probably the simplest. So over here, let's go to the service because we're going to do this inside of the service. And in here, let's go to the get report by ID. So what this is doing is it's going to give us one specific report, as you can see right over here. So this is going to return to us one report. It's either going to return to us null if we can't find anything, or the report. So what we can do here is we can just very simply do const report is equal to this. And then we can just check if the report doesn't exist. We can just return early. However, if the report does exist, then, well, let's return the report. So this is the object that we have. So what we can do is we can utilize this DTO, instantiate this DTO over here. So we can do report response DTO and pass in that report. Once it passes it in, what it can do is, again, it can transform it. However, now what we need to do is we need to specify inside of our DTO that we're able to pass things in. So let's actually go to our DTO here. And in order to specify that we want things being passed in, we do that inside of the constructor. That's just basic class stuff. I'm going to call the thing that we're going to pass in partial. So let's go here, partial. And we're going to give this a type of partial. And this is the native TypeScript type. And then we're going to say report response DTO. So what does this mean? Well, this means that what we can do here is we can pass in any object that is resembling to the one we have here. So it doesn't have to be the complete thing. It could be partial of that thing. So it could have a source, an amount it created at. It doesn't need to have every field. Let me show you what I mean. So over here, we can pass in an object that has an ID that's a string. However, we cannot pass in an object that has this property right here. So again, it can be a partial of what we have. So you can see that works. So let's go here, let's say report. And we're gonna go ahead and inside of the constructor, we're just gonna do an object.assign, and we're gonna this.partial, just so we can assign the object here. So that's really all it is that we need to do. And as you can see, now that's working a-okay. So let's go ahead and do that for every single thing. So let's go here. So this is the create report. Let's instantiate a new DTO. New, what is it called again? It's called, what do we call it? Report response DTO. We're gonna pass in that. For the updated, we're gonna do new response DTO. Oh my goodness, I'm almost forgetting what it's called. Report response DTO. Go ahead and invoke that like so, and then pass that in. For the delete, we don't have to do that. Now for the get, this one's a little bit more complicated because what we're doing here is we're iterating over everything. So what we can do here is actually append a .map because this is going to return an array. And then in here, we can grab the report. And what we can do, and maybe we can just return new report response DTO, and we can pass in the report like that. So that's really all it is that we have to do. In the app controller, everything is fine. So this is step one. Now this isn't gonna solve the issue because if I make this request, again, spoiler alert, it's not gonna do anything yet, but this was a necessary step to get this to work. So that's step number one. Let's go ahead and talk about step number two later. Step number two, this one's a relatively quick one. All we need to do here is tell NestJS that we wanted to give it the ability to transform our objects. So this one's pretty simple. All we really need to do is say transform true, and this is of course in the main.ts file in the validation pipe. We can also say transform options, and then in here we can have the, what was the option called again? Enable implicit conversion. We can also set that to true. So this one was really quick. And again, spoiler alert, it's not gonna do the trick just yet. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move on to step three right away because then this video would be extremely short. So step three has to do with the modules. So we're gonna go over here to the app.module.ts file. And at the moment of time, what I'm gonna do is gonna make completely no sense. Do not worry, we're just gonna go ahead and code it out and then I'll explain exactly what's going on later. So inside of the providers over here, so remember the providers was where we supply all of our services that we want utilized inside of this module. What we're gonna do is we're gonna provide an object. This object is gonna have the property of provide, and it's going to have the value of app interceptor. Now we can go ahead and auto import this in from @NestJS core. So you can see here, app NestJS core. So that is going to be the provide. Now over here, we're also going to supply it with a use class property. Now this is going to be another thing that we're going to import. And this is going to be the serializer class. So over here, it's going to be a serializer class interceptor, the class serializer interceptor. And we can import that from @nestCommon. So let's go ahead and save this. And again, this is going to make no sense, but don't worry, we're going to explain exactly what's going on here a little bit later. We're going to go ahead and save this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make this request. And voila! As you can see here, that our thing is updated. How cool is that? You can see that we do not see the updated @. Now, before I explain exactly what's going on here, because again, this is completely makes no sense, and it actually is really important that you understand what's going on here, because this interceptor thing is another entity that's really important to understand in NestJS. Let's go ahead and figure out exactly how we can transform this created from being snake case to camel case. Let's do that. In order to transform something, we need to go back to our response DTO. Now before we used this exclude decorator, now we want to use this expose decorator. So right over here, what we can do is @expose, so let's go over here, @expose, we can invoke it, and then we can supply it with options. You can supply it with an option with these curly braces, and we can say name, and then we can say the name of the property that we want it to be called. This is going to be created @. And then right below it, we can specify a method that is going to return the value of this property. So we can say here, I don't know, transform created @. That's what we can call it. And what we can do here is we can actually get the value of the created @ and just return it. So over here, we can just do this dot created @. That's really all it is that we need to do. So now if we went ahead and send off this request, you might see something a little bit funky. So you can see here, we have the created @ that is underscore still there, but we also have the camel case. So what we actually need to do is exclude this created @ over here. So let's go ahead and exclude that. So we can go ahead and exclude it. So we exclude this from the properties. However, we're exposing this right here. And just for order's sake, maybe we can even put that like right here. And that should do the trick. There we go. How cool is that? Alright, so now that we got that working, let's discuss exactly what's going on here inside of the module. So inside of the module, let's quickly remind ourselves exactly what we did. Inside of this providers array, we added this object, we said app interceptor, and then over here, we said class serializer interceptor. Now, in order to understand this block of code, you first need to understand what an interceptor is inside of NestJS. So let's actually look at a quick diagram to explain this. So over here, I have a typical request response diagram illustrating how the client will interact with a server. Now over here, we have a client. It doesn't really matter what that is. Could be Postman, could be a real website, whatever. A client is going to make a request to our Nest API. Our Nest API is going to process that request and send back a response. Now, an interceptor is something that actually lies between the request as well as the response. So for example, what we can actually do is, if we wanted, we can create an interceptor where if the client is going to make a request to the server, before actually reaching the server, it's going to be intercepted by the interceptor. In there, we can have any sort of processing, we can modify the request, and then it's going to go ahead and be sent to the server. Now we could also set up the interceptor where it can intercept the response. So before being sent all the way to the client, it can intercept it, it can do some sort of processing, and then it can send it to the client. Now you can probably imagine what this block of code is doing. So over here we're saying that we wanted to provide an app interceptor, which means that for every single endpoint, every single HTTP request, we want to apply an interceptor. Now what is that interceptor? Well, this interceptor right over here, the class serializer interceptor. Now this is a built-in interceptor that comes with NestJS, and we'll later learn exactly how we can build our own custom interceptors. But this right here is a serializer interceptor. And if you don't know what serializers are, it's just a way that we can modify and change our data. So what is happening here? Well, probably what this interceptor is doing is before sending the response to the client, it's going to be intercepting it. It's going to look at the DTOs and somehow modify that response and then send it to the client with the modified response. And that's exactly what is happening. So I hope this is actually clear. Now, in order to truly understand interceptors, let's go ahead and create our own custom interceptor that is going to mock exactly what this interceptor was doing. We're going to go ahead and create that interceptor and then use it, but then we're going to go ahead and delete it because, well, we already have this class serializer interceptor that's going to do our job. So we're just doing it just for learning purposes. Let's go ahead and implement our very first interceptor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the source directory. I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call it custom.interceptor.ts. Now in here, we're going to create our interceptor. Now an interceptor is an entity inside of NestJS. Now let's remember exactly each entity in NestJS is going to be created by a class. So let's go over here and we're going to say class and we're going to call this custom interceptor. So custom interceptor. Now I'm going to do something else. I'm also going to go over here and I'm going to import something called nest interceptor. I'm going to get that from @nestcommon. So nest interceptor, and over here, instead of just doing the class like so, which is completely valid, I am going to say implements nest interceptor. And right away we're getting an error. So over here, Nest Interceptor is another class of its own, and this class has all of the different properties that are needed to create an interceptor in Nest. So here, what I'm basically saying is that I want to create this custom interceptor, and I want it to be implemented like a Nest interceptor. Now, once I do that, what ends up happening is if I don't have the certain properties in here, certain methods, certain properties that are needed to create a interceptor like it would be created in Nest, it starts yelling at us. So over here, you can see here that it's saying custom interceptor incorrectly implements interface Nest interceptor. It needs to have an interceptor method, as you can see here. So this is really good. This is really good typing that you wouldn't get normally with JavaScript. So now we know we need to have this intercept method. So let's go ahead and create that. So intercept. And this intercept method is going to take in two parameters. Now it's going to take in the context, and the context is not something that we're going to use at the moment, but it's something that is going to give us more information about the incoming request. So just a quick reminder, over here, the client is going to send a request to the server, but it's going to be intercepted first by the interceptor. Sometimes we want information about that request. Maybe you want some query params or whatever. We can get that from the context. And then over here, the next thing that we're going to get is the handler. So the handler is the endpoint or the next interceptor that we want to give it to. So we want to hand it over to. So over here, we have the interceptor. The handler is this endpoint that we're eventually going to reach. I hope that makes sense. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to type these two things. So let's go ahead and do that. Now this context is going to have a type of execution context. And the handler is going to have a type of call handler. So let's go here and let's give this a type of execution context, just so we can have better typing here instead of having it be any. And then here we can say call handler. Now this is still yelling at us because we have to eventually return something. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to return. So I'm going to go ahead and return. And what ends up happening here is this actually returns an observable. If you don't know RxJS, that's completely fine. But if you are familiar with it, it's going to return an observable. Again, not really important. You just need to understand the structure of this. Let me quickly explain. So it's going to return handler, and then we're going to say dot handle. And then if you're familiar with RxJS, this is where it's going to become more familiar. We're going to say dot pipe. And then in here, what we're going to do is we're going to import something called an operator from RxJS. So over here, we're going to import from RxJS. Where is that? RxJS. We're going to import an operator, and we're going to specifically call this map. Now, there's multiple different operators out there. We're going to use the most generic one called map. Again, if this doesn't make much sense to you, this isn't an RxJS course. Again, I'll show you what you should understand from this process later. If you want to go into more and more detail, then maybe it'll be worthwhile to learn RxJS. So over here, we're going to say dot pipe. And then inside of here, we're going to have map. So we're going to call map. And map is going to take a callback function. And inside of this callback, we're going to have the data. So this is the data that we're actually going to be passing in. So over here, this is the data that we're going to be getting back. I'll explain that in a bit. And then over here, we can go ahead and return the data, whatever. We can do whatever it is that we want with it. Let's go ahead and return it. So what's going on here? So we created this interceptor method, and might as well go ahead and export it because we're going to want to use it eventually. So anything that is inside of this pipe, so anything that's inside of this pipe, so inside of this map method, is going to be handling the outgoing response. So anything inside of here is going to be handling the outgoing response. Now anything that's not inside of the pipe, like over here, let me go ahead and console.log. Console.log, this is before the request. Or I guess this is during the request. Or you know what? This is intercepting the request. And then anything over here inside of the pipe, this is intercepting the response. So let's go ahead and actually utilize this interceptor. So I'm actually not running my application at the moment. Let's go ahead and run that. So I'm going to do an npm run dev. npm run dev, we're missing that. Sorry guys, I forgot let's look at the package.json here. Npm run start dev, that's what it was. Okay, so open that up again. I'm going to do npm run start dev, just so we can start up our app. Cool. And now what we're going to do is we're going to utilize this custom interceptor inside of this module right over here. So from that new interceptor file, we're going to import that custom interceptor. So from this file, custom interceptor, we're going to get custom interceptor like so. We're also going to utilize the custom interceptor instead of the class serializer interceptor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this. Let's open up our terminal again. And let's go to Postman. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a report. So let's go over here. Let's create an income report. I'm going to say Udemy. And I'm going to go ahead and create this. So you can see that it's working fine. Now you can see actually, let me zoom in here a little bit. You can actually see that the interceptor is not doing anything, which makes sense because we're not really doing any logic inside of our interceptor at the moment. You can see here that we're not really getting, any of those changes that we truly desired. So over here, you can see that our interceptor is working. So over here, this is intercepting the request, and then this is intercepting the response. So you can see that this is working a-okay. So over here, let's actually go ahead and also console.log. So inside of the intercepting the request, let's console.log the context so we can just see it a little bit better. I'm going to put it inside of an object as well. So I'm going to console.log the context, and then in here, I'm going to also console.log the data. So this is going to be the data that's going to be in the response. Let's just see what happens here. Let's go back to Postman. Let's send off this request. Okay, so over here, you can see the context. So this is the context. This is the data that we're getting from the incoming request. You can see we have the arguments. We have a bunch of different information that we can utilize in order to manipulate the request in any way. In this video, where we're going to actually create this custom interceptor, we're not going to really be dealing with the context. Specifically, I'm more interested in this right over here. So you can see over here, we're actually getting back the data that we want to send back to the client. So what we can actually do here inside of the pipe itself is actually manipulate that data. So how do you think we can do that? Well, what we can do here is we can say const response, and we can say that the response is equal to an object. And we can destructure out everything that is already in the data. Another thing that we can also do is camel case the created at. That's eventually what we want. So we can add this new property, and we can say that this is equal to data.created at. Now also, if you want, we can actually go ahead and type this better so we can actually know exactly what the types are. We're going to delete this, so really no point of doing that at this point. So over here we have that response. Now another thing we can do is, now what we want to do is we want to delete the created underscore at, as well as delete the created updated underscore at. So over here what we can do is we can say delete, and we can say response, and then we can say dot, oh my goodness, response dot updated underscore at. And what this is going to do is going to delete that property from this object. So let's go ahead over here and let's also delete the created at. Now by the end of it, we can actually just return the response instead of the data. So now let's actually see what happens. So let's actually get rid of these logs. No need for that anymore. So let's see what happens here. Let's go ahead and send off this request. Let's open up our terminal first. Close that off. Let's send off this request. And now you can see, ta-da, we're getting the exact same thing. And that's exactly what that class interceptor that we have over here is doing. Now, this one's a little bit more nuanced. It's actually looking at the DTOs and looking at all of the different things, but that's exactly the same concept. It's looking at the DTOs, looking what we want to exclude. So it goes ahead and excludes it. And anything it wants to include, it goes ahead and includes it. So, you know, very simple stuff. I hope you guys kind of get the point here. All right, so that is our very first custom interceptor. Now we're not going to be utilizing this interceptor. I won't delete it just for, you know, documentation, I guess. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and not use the interceptor though. So we're going to get rid of that interceptor. And then in here, we're going to use that class interceptor because, you know, why are we reinventing the wheel? So let's go here and save that. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all it is that we need to do. And that's going to result in the same response. Ta-da! There we go. And that actually almost concludes our application. Now there is one more thing that we need to talk about, and that is how we are actually structuring our files. This isn't the best way of structuring files. We'll talk about how to fix that in the next section. Alright, my good friends, before we actually conclude this, I want to create one more endpoint. Now this endpoint over here is going to be a summary endpoint. So we're going to hit something like /summary. And in here, what this is going to do is return an object. And inside of the object, we're going to have our total expenses. So it's going to calculate our total expenses. It's going to calculate our total income. And then it's going to calculate our net income. So the total expenses minus the total income, or the other way around actually. Total income minus the total expenses. So this actually presents a new problem. How are we going to create a new endpoint with a new path? If we go over here to our app.controller, so this app.controller, you can see that the only path that we have right now is /report / whatever the type is. So /expense, for example. However, what we want is /summary. So how are we going to do this? Well, there's actually a very simple solution. We're going to need to create a new controller. In fact, we shouldn't even have put all of our code inside of this controller in the first place. This actually should have been in its own controller, and we should have another controller for the summary. So let's go ahead and create a summary controller. And then what we're going to do is, we're going to also create a report controller to house this stuff. And then we're going to empty out our app controller. So let's go open up our terminal. And now we're going to start using the CLI again. So remember that CLI we used to create the project? Well, now we're going to use it to create some entities. So the first thing that we need to do when we want to create a new entity is we need to create a module. Every single entity needs to have a module. So over here, we're going to say nest and then G for generate. And then we're going to say we want to generate a module. Now specifically, we want to generate a summary module. So that's just going to be the name of it. Now over here, once that happens, give it some time. Inside of the source directory, let's give it some time. It takes some time, this Nest CLI. Let's just wait years and years and years and years and years. And there we go. So now you can see that it has created this module for us and actually put it inside of this directory. Now also specifically what it did, it also updated the app.module.ts file. And we actually need this to happen in order to utilize the module. So what it did was it actually imported that summary module and it put it inside of the imports of the app module. Now what's happening here is that wherever that this summary module is going to be used, so whatever is inside of this summary module is going to be imported into the root app module, and thus is going to be imported inside of our Nest application. So that right there is the module. So let's go ahead and now create a controller for this. And we might as well also create a service. So we're going to go over here. We're going to do nest generate. And this time we're going to say controller. And this is going to create a controller for us. Now notice what's going to happen. It's going to update the summary.module.ts file. So over here, you can see that it created a controller file and also created a spec file. This is for testing. We'll talk about that in the next project. And then also updated the summary.module. So you can see here in the summary.module, we are now specifying that there is a controller called summary controller. Now by specifying that inside of the app.module, we're importing that summary module, so it's going to know about that summary controller. So the last thing that we need to do is create a service for this. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and create a service. And that's pretty much all we need for now. So in the next video, what we're going to do is instead of diving deep into actually coding out this stuff, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a report directory with a report module, with a report controller, as well as a report service. And we're going to move all of this logic in there. So let's go ahead and do that in the next video. Let's go ahead and create a controller for our reports. So in here, we're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to generate the module first. We're going to generate a module. We're going to call it report. Let's go ahead and do that. Again, it's going to take some time. I hate how long it takes. Yes, I do. Very much dislike how long it takes to generate something. So now let's go over here. Let's also create a controller for the report. And we're also going to create a service. So let's go ahead and wait. Now the last thing we need to do is create the service. So let's go ahead and do that. Service. All right, so now let's actually go ahead and start extracting some of this code and moving it in here. Let's actually begin with all of the service stuff. So this is actually going to be relatively easy. All we really have to do is just copy this code and paste it inside of here. So inside of what we call the service. Oh, we should have called that report. Okay, we made a mistake here. Let's go ahead and delete this. We have a controller. Okay. So we created, what do we have here? Why do we have this? This is kind of strange. Let's go ahead and delete this. We did not want that. Now this probably is going to cause some issues across our application. Let's go ahead and take a look at exactly what those issues are. So you can see over here we're missing a service controller. This is probably going to be inside of, let's see here. What file is this in? This is in the app module. So let's go to the app module and let's just clean up that mess that we made. Or that I made. Maybe you guys didn't make that mess. Let's get rid of that and let's also get rid of this. There we go. But now you can see we also have the summary module as well as the report module in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the report service file and I'm going to just paste all of our code that we did right here. Now in here, let's go ahead and just fix the import. So we're going to say source.dto just so we can import it from the root. And we're also going to call this report service. So that's all it is that we need to do. Really, really simple. Let's do the exact same thing for the controllers. But before we do that, let's go ahead and empty out our service. We don't need that anymore. So we don't need any of this stuff. It just could be an empty class. So we can get rid of all this. We can get rid of that. We can get rid of this interface. We can get rid of this interface. It could just be an empty class. We're not really using it at this moment. So now what we need to do is do the exact same thing for the app controller. So let's go here and let's paste that logic inside of the report controller. Now notice the report controller actually already has the report path, but what we need to do now is just add the type path. So, well, let's just go ahead and just paste that in. Anyways, it's not gonna matter. Let's go ahead and paste that in, and then over here we're importing the app service. Now what we want to do is we want to import something else called, well, we're going to call this the report service because that's what we're trying to get. And we're going to get that from the report service. Let's also get this from source, and that should fix most of the import issues. Over here now what we can do is we can call this report service. We can also call this the report controller. And over here we can call this report service. Now we're going to need to change the report service on each one of these things over here. So let's go ahead and do that. Hopefully this isn't too big of a refactor. It isn't actually, but sometimes people get annoyed by refactoring. That's pretty much all it is. We're done. That's really it. The last thing that we probably should do is just delete everything inside of here. So let's just grab everything and just leave an empty class in here. So let's go ahead, delete everything. Now we have this empty class. Let's get rid of this. And let's just get rid of everything in here other than the stuff that we need to import. So let's just delete everything. Let's just auto import the controller. There we go. So this still should work the way that we expected. Let's see if we get any errors inside of our terminal. So let's go here. Seems like everything is working fine. Let's actually go ahead and test everything. So let's try to get all of our reports, our income reports. We get back, we get back this over here, our hard-coded reports. Let's try to get back our expenses. You can see that we get back our hard-coded expenses. Let's go back to income. Let's go ahead and create a report. Let's see if we can do that. Yes, we can. Let's try to get that report. Yes, we can get that. How cool is that? Now, let's go ahead and try to specifically get one report. So let's go here and just say /report, and this should be /income. Let's go ahead and make that request. That still works. Let's try to update something now. So let's try to update an income report. Let's go to our body. Let's change the amount to, let's get rid of the source. Let's change the amount to 1 million. Because I'm very rich. Very, very rich. Is that even a million or a billion? I think this is 100 million. Why not? I'll take that. That works. And then all we need to do is delete. I'm assuming that works. I'm not even going to test it. So now you can see that we're actually separating our concerns into separate folders. And this is the best practice of doing things. Obviously, we don't want to stick everything inside of the app controller. So as you can see, everything is fine. So now let's go ahead and actually start working on the summary controller. And when we start working on the summary controller, it's going to actually present us with a little bit of problems. Now that we got that settled, let's go ahead and start working with our summary controller. So let's go over here. Just wanted to go ahead and close everything. And inside of the summary controller, we're going to create a new endpoint. And this is just going to be called get summary. So get summary. And remember what this is going to do. It's going to return a total of our income, total of our expenses, and the net income. So total income minus total expenses. So over here, what we can do is we can create this method, and right on top we can use a get decorator for this, because it's going to be a get request. And this is going to be a get request to /summary because, well, it's the /summary. Now in here, what we're going to do is we're going to call a specific service. And what service are we going to call? We're going to call the summary service, which we haven't created. So let's go ahead and open up our terminal. And let's do a nest generate. And we're going to generate, oh, I see what I did there. So I'm going to generate a service. And I'm going to call this service, what am I going to call this service? Summary. So now that is going to do its magic, let's just wait a little bit to create that service. 5, 4, there we go. So, oops. So right in here, what we're going to do is we're going to grab the service. And inside of the service, we're going to have our logic in order to, of course, create the summary as well as, the logic to get the expenses and the income. You guys get the point. So we can go over here, we can create a service called calculate summary. And for now, we'll just leave it empty. And then in here, what we'll do is we're just going to do our return. And let's go ahead and actually inject that service in through the constructor. So we're going to say constructor, we're going to say private read only. I don't know if I did that with the other service. Let's go ahead over here just to see that inside of this controller. Did I do a read only on this one? Yeah, I did. Read only. This just basically means that we don't want to modify it in any way. We just want to be able to utilize it. So read only, and we want to get the summary service, and we're going to type it with the summary service class. So summary service like so. All right, so that's pretty much all it is that we're going to need to do. And then over here, we can do this dot summary service dot calculate summary. So let's go ahead and save that. So in here, this is where all of our business logic is going to live. Now, the first thing that we need to do is, well, we need to get all of our income as well as all of our reports. So what we could do is we could do that manually. Like we could go over here and, import the data and start doing that ourselves manually. However, there's really no point of doing that. The reason why is because if we go over here to the report service, you can see we actually have a method that does that for us. So instead of writing this code over again, might as well use this method. Now this is actually going to present a problem to us. How are we going to inject this report service from this directory into the summary directory inside of the summary.service.ts file? How in the world are we going to do that? Well, you might be thinking, well, we can probably do the same thing that we've been doing so far. We can go here, we can say constructor, We can say private read only. We can call this the report service, and then we can type it with the report service. I'm going to go ahead and auto import that in. Looks like it's not auto importing. That's okay. Let's go ahead and actually manually import it. So from source /report service, let's go ahead and get that report service, and then we're going to say report service here. Okay, so you might be thinking that this is fine. However, let's actually go over here and let's take a look at what's going on here. I wasn't expecting this error. Let me go ahead and just comment this out. Let's save this up. Okay, so it's working now. It's working a-okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to uncomment this. I'm going to go ahead and save it. We're going to get an error right away. Now, NestJS does not understand this dependency one bit. It does not know what this report service is. And this is why what we need to do is we need to inject this service inside of the summary.module.ts. So over here, what we can very simply do in order to get this to work is from the source-report/service, what we can do is we can actually provide it as a provider. So we can get the report service like so. Now let's go take a look at what happens once we try to execute this. Let's see if the error goes away. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this, and now it understands exactly what it is. Now this is one way of doing things. However, this isn't actually the recommended way of approaching it. Why? Well, inside of our reports, we could have multiple services, and we might need to import multiple things from this report directory. So it's actually a better approach than rather than importing every single service manually to get rid of the service. We're not going to import the service, but rather we're not going to put the service inside of the provider. Rather, what we're going to do is we are going to put this inside of the import. So what we're going to do is we're going to import the report module as a whole. So the report module as a whole. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this, and this is actually going to give us an error. So if we want to import the report module as a whole, then what we need to do is we need to go to the report.module.ts file and explicitly say what we want to export. So meaning any module that is going to import this report module is going to get the services and the controllers that we explicitly export from the report.module.ts file. If that doesn't make any sense, let me explain. Over here, we're going to provide another property, and we're going to say that we are going to export the report service. Now, if you have multiple other services in here, we can add them in. So I don't know, another service right in here. Now, for now, because this is the only service we have, we're just going to export this service. So what's happening here is when we import the report module in the summary.module.ts, we're going to get everything that it exports, which is the report service. So now if we go ahead and save this, you can see it is working okay. This is actually a better approach, importing the module as a whole rather than nitpicking every single provider. All right, so now that we got the imports all done, that's pretty much really all it is that we need, any kind of a new concept. In the next video, let's actually go ahead and actually implement the logic to create the controller as well as to conclude our application. Let us conclude this application by moving into the summary.service.ts file. And in here, let's go ahead and implement the calculate summary logic. Now, as a quick reminder, eventually what we want to return is the total income. So for now, I'm just going to leave it as an empty string, or maybe a number. That would make more sense. The total expenses, save that as a number, and then the net income, which is going to be the total income minus the total expenses. So in this case, 90. We'll leave it as that mathematical calculation for now. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get the total expenses. So let's actually use the report service for this. So for this, let's go over here to the report service just so we can get some clear idea of what's going on. So we have get all reports. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say all expenses. I'm going to say that this is equal to this dot report service dot get all reports, and we're going to supply it with, remember we have to supply it with the enum. I'm going to go ahead and auto import that enum in. As you can see, it auto imported. And for now, we're going to get all the expenses. So dot expenses. So this is going to get us all of our expenses inside of an array. So this isn't really what we want. What we want to do is we want to get the total expenses. So what we can actually do is we can actually reduce down this array to a number by utilizing the dot reduce built-in method. So the dot reduce built-in method. So what this dot reduce is going to take is, first of all, the accumulator. So the accumulator is this thing that we eventually want to compress it to. We want to compress it to a sum. So we're going to say sum. And then it's also going to take in the current element that we're iterating over, which is the report. Now another thing that we need to pass in other than this callback is the initial value of the sum, which initially will be 0. So over here, what we can very simply do for each iteration of the report, we can just simply return the sum plus the report dot amount. And what this will do is just going to compress this down to a number, which is going to be the total expense. Let's go ahead and do the exact same thing for the total income. This is going to be very similar. Total income over here. And this time we're just going to need to change this to income. And then over here, what we can do is instead of actually hard coding the code, we can start utilizing these variables. And then for the net income, you can just say total income minus total expense. So total income minus total expense. And that's pretty much it. And that should conclude it because our controller is actually already utilizing this, this function. So best thing to do is to go ahead and test this out. So let's go to our app.ts file. Remember, we have some hard-coded things in here. So we have a salary here of 7,500. We also have another income of 2,500, and we have this food for 500. So for income, we should get 10,000. For expenses, we should get 500. And then for the net, we should get 9,500 if this works properly. So let's go ahead here and let's just save some of these requests. Let's get rid of them. Let's copy this. Let's get rid of that, get rid of that. Let's go here and we're gonna call this request get summary. I'm gonna go ahead and paste that in. The URL is gonna be, let me zoom in here. The URL is gonna be /summary. Let me zoom out. We're gonna go ahead and make this request and well, as you can see, it is working a-okay. So that pretty much concludes this project. I hope you guys learned a lot. And this is going to be a huge foundation for the next project where we're going to learn a lot of the more advanced concepts. So this is where you're actually going to start becoming a real NestJS expert. You're going to know a lot of these different things that most NestJS developers don't even know. So, well, I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll see you guys in the next project.